Chapter 1138. After hearing such good news, Pang Xiao became even more anxious to end the battle quickly. The people around him noticed that his attacks were becoming more and more aggressive. Every battle, big or small, revealed a sense of surprise and ruthlessness. It was as if he used to be a sheathed sword, but now he was showing off his ability. Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu also noticed some details on the battlefield. Why do I feel that the discord between Sai Qin and Lu Heng has deepened? Pang Xiao whispered. You think so too? Ji Zheyu's words confirmed Pang Xiao's guess. It seems that what we did before is effective. Yes. They are not of the same race after all. They don't trust each other to begin with. The battlefield is constantly changing, and any small matter can affect the outcome of the battle. It is impossible for them to not care about their own safety. Naturally, they trust each other less and less. Pang Xiao laughed mockingly. He was even more confident about this battle. Looking at the recruits who were training seriously on the drill ground, Pang Xiao sighed. These recruits came here with a blood feud. We drove away the Tatan all the way here. The places we passed were once the homes of these recruits. At that time, when the Tartars marched straight into our territory, they were brutally slaughtered wherever they went. Who didn't want to avenge their family members who were lucky enough to escape alive? They fought with anger and determination to take revenge. It was as if they didn't care about their lives. The Tatan were familiar with their aura. It seemed that the day of driving the Tatan out of Daeju was closer. Ji Zheyu saw Pang Xiao's confidence. He thought of the current situation of Pang Xiao's family and whispered, "Have you named your son and daughter?" "I have." When Pang Xiao mentioned this, even his expression changed. "My son is called Xian Ji and my daughter is called Yun Jie. Pang Rushuan and Pang Ruyun are both named Ru in this generation of the Pang family." Ji Zheyu smiled. "That's a nice name. The child will also be very good-looking." At the mention of children, Pang Xiao was a little excited and became more talkative. "I've always preferred daughters. Daughters are obedient. It would be even better if they looked like their mother. To this day, I still remember Sister Yi's appearance when I first met her in Liang City. Back then, she was still very young. At such a young age, she was already thinking of ways to treat her foster mother's illness. If I were my daughter, I definitely wouldn't bear to let her suffer so much. Back then, I had too much ability to help Sister Yi and didn't participate in her life when she was young. Now, I can take care of a child who looks like Sister Yi." Pang Xiao spoke incoherently. The joy and hope in his words made Ji Zheyu shake his head and laugh. "It's all thanks to your little miss that I can see you being so childish." Pang Xiao was taken aback for a moment before he burst into laughter. While the war was tense, Pang Xiao could always find joy and hope. Qin Yining went through his confinement with peace of mind under the care of Bing Tang and the others. "I wonder what Wang Yi will name Little Master." And Little Miss Ji Yun sat sideways by the window and looked at Brother Zhao, who was wrapped in the swaddling clothes of a big red magpie, looking around with wide eyes. She couldn't help but gently tap the other child's face with her finger. Qin Yining smiled and said, "There's no rush. There's no rush to name the child. Previously, when I was in the countryside, the child was barely able to come up with a name when he was older. Haven't you always been in good health?" "Yes, I also heard that it's easy to raise a child with a cheap name. Therefore, many rich families deliberately give their children cheap names. Things like bolts, benches, and so on." Bing Tang couldn't help but laugh, "But our little miss is as beautiful as a flower. It's not good to give her a vulgar and unpleasant name." Qin Yining was amused by Bing Tang's conflicted appearance. She even forgot the frustration of not washing her hair during confinement. Seeing Qin Yining smile, Bing Tang coaxed, "Wang Fei, just hold on for a few more days. You'll be 17 in 3 days. When Jie and Jie are 1 month old, this servant will definitely serve you to bathe and dress you up. Right now, I'm not letting you wash your hair or open the window because I'm afraid you'll get sick. If you get sick during confinement, then you can only be cured during the next confinement. Does Wang Fei have to suffer every day? I know you're doing this for my own good." Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. "You're too careful. I'm fine. I know what to do at what time." The days passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, the children were 1 month old. Due to the current tense situation, Qin Yining was worried that she wouldn't be able to protect the children if something happened. Therefore, she didn't hold a big celebration for the children's 3rd and 1-month-old birthdays. She wanted to keep the children in her sight at all times, afraid that something would happen. She let the children follow her old path. On this day, Qin Yining had just ordered the wet nurse to bring the children over when Bing Tang quickly walked in and said with a smile, "Wang Fei, Wang Yi's letter arrive. Quickly let me see." Qin Yining hurriedly stood up and took the letter. She opened it and said, "Wang Yi might have already thought of the children's names. Nowadays, the transmission of letters is much slower than before. It's making me wait. It's because Wang Yi and the others are driving the Taitan people further and further away." Ji Yun also received Tang Xiu's letter. After she finished reading it, she walked in a very good mood. Qin Yining carefully read the letter and didn't miss a single word. Finally, she chewed on the 2 names Rushuan and Ruyun and said with a smile, "That's great. Ruzhao, Ruhan, Rushuan, and Ruyun. It's obvious that they're a family." After she finished speaking, she was a little worried for a long time. If Brother Zhao and Brother Han find out that they have a younger brother or sister, will they think that I don't care about them anymore? Ji Yun and Bing Tang laughed loudly when they heard this. "Wang Fei is too careful. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Brother Zhao and Brother Han are already grown up. Moreover, they're by their maternal grandfather's side. How could they go astray?" Thinking of her father's ability, Qin Yining was slightly relieved. In the blink of an eye, Brother Zhao and Brother Han are almost 4 years old. But I can't be by their side most of the time. Qin Yining was a little downcast. She walked to the side of the cradle and bent down to look at the twins who were sleeping soundly. "I don't know when this kind of homeless life will end. In the future, when Brother Xian and Sister Yun grow up, I have to learn this lesson." She had experienced the most painful separation in the world. Her situation in the future shouldn't be worse than now, right? Just as Qin Yining was taking care of the children with peace of mind, the people that Pang Xiao secretly arranged outside the Fu noticed something strange at the same time. It's really strange. Why are there more young men walking on Golden Harbor Street than before? That's right. Didn't most people go with Wang Yi to fight the Tartans? Now that there are suddenly so many new faces, it's really strange. Should we tell Sir Xie about this? Of course we should. Wang Yi arranged to secretly protect Wang Fei, but it's not necessary to hide it from Wang Fei. Right now, the situation is tense. It's best to be safe. The Jinghu Wei discussed and decided that one person would go to Xieyu to report. The others would continue to guard their original positions. When Xieyu learned of this matter, she didn't dare to conceal it and immediately went to tell Qin Yining. Qin Yining was holding Sister Yun in her arms and gently rocking her. Hearing this, her hands paused. She hesitantly said, "This matter is really not simple. These people may have come with a purpose. It's very likely that they are targeting us." "Yes." Xieyu's expression was serious as she said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. I've already ordered people to set up a tight defense. I won't let anyone plot against us. But at this time, if we can get in touch with Magistrate Chen, it will be safer. You and Wang Yi have done so much for the people. Magistrate Chen is a straightforward and loyal person. He will definitely remember what you and Wang Yi have done and do his best to protect you. Magistrate Chen has people from the Yamen in his hands. It will be more convenient for him to act." Sir Xie is very right. Qin Yining nodded in agreement. "I'll have to trouble Sir Xie to make a trip." "Of course. Wang Fei, don't worry." Xieyu bowed and left. Qin Yining was in a daze as she held Sister Yun. She was certain that these people who suddenly came to Golden Harbor were targeting her. Her first suspicion was Li Chitian. Li Chitian was very jealous. It was difficult for him to have children. Now that Pang Xiao had a pair of twins, Li Chitian was very jealous. It was possible that he would kill them because of this. Qin Yining was very worried. She was not afraid of anything. But Brother Xian and Sister Yun were still in swaddling clothes. How could they stand the friction and bumps? Just as Qin Yining expected. At this time, Li Chitian received the good news from the front line. Although he had a satisfied smile on his face, he had been suppressing a fire in his heart. Thanks to Prince Zhongxian's bravery and good fighting skills, Taytan has finally been driven out of Tianyu Pass. From now on, Daju's territory is still Daju. No foreign enemy can invade. That's right. It's also thanks to Your Majesty who knows how to use people well. The officials were jubilant. There was nothing more exciting than driving out foreign enemies. When these people were praising Prince Zhongxian, they did not forget to flatter Li Chitian. However, listening to the officials praising Pang Xiao, Li Chitian did not refute because he wanted to show his grace. He was now the emperor, so it was not convenient for him to personally lead the army. Otherwise, if he led the army, it would not be much worse than Pang Xiao's. With so many people, the Taytan people were naturally scared witless and obediently hid out of Tianyu Pass. Everything was fine, but all the credit had been taken by him. It was really tiresome. In the imperial court, Li Chitian had a belly full of anger. Who knew that when he returned to the imperial study, he would receive a letter from the spies. The Qin clan actually gave birth to twins for Pang Xiao. Li Chitian's eyes were like bronze bells. He gritted his teeth and glared at the spies. The spies bowed their heads and said, "Yes. He doesn't deserve it." Li Chitian was furious. He raised his hand and grabbed the inkstone on the table and smashed it against the corner of the wall. He then kicked over the high table in the corner. The blue and white porcelain vase on top of it fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." Xiong Jinshui and the other eunuchs did not care about the broken porcelain on the ground and hurriedly kowtowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." How could Li Chitian quell his anger? What he hated the most was that he was already the emperor, but there were always people who felt that he could not compare to Pang Xiao. Now, there was no movement from his imperial harem, but Pang Xiao had a bunch of twins and phoenixes. Who did he think he was? Did he deserve to have twins and phoenixes? Chapter 1139. Li Chitian's face was ferocious, scaring the spies, Xiong Jinshui, and the other eunuchs into silence. They buried their heads tightly and didn't dare to look at Your Majesty's face. It doesn't matter if they look now, but if something happens in the future and Your Majesty loses face, wouldn't it be their fault? Li Chitian paced back and forth with his hands behind his back, his face gloomy. At this moment, a young eunuch's joyful voice suddenly came from outside. "Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager's head palace maid came." She said that the Empress Dowager was very happy to hear that Prince Zhongxian and Duke Dingguo defeated the Taytan and drove them out of Daju so quickly. Today, the Empress Dowager is going to hold a banquet in Xi'an Palace to celebrate the victory. She asked if Your Majesty is free to go and have a family banquet together. Celebrate, celebrate. What's there to celebrate? Wasn't it normal that Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu could drive the Taytan out of Daju? If it were him, he might be faster. How could he deserve so many people's praise? Li Chitian's face was dark. After a long time, he said patiently, "Zhen knows." The young eunuch didn't know that Li Chitian had just lost his temper and thought that he was also happy to recover the lost territory. Therefore, she happily agreed and turned around to quickly deliver the letter to Xi'an Palace. Xiong Jinshui, who was kneeling on the ground, was so nervous that his muscles tightened. He was afraid that the emperor would vent his anger on them in the blink of an eye. It would be good to beat them up, but it was also possible to drag them out and behead them. Li Chitian gritted his teeth and endured for a long time to suppress his anger. He couldn't show his anger and jealousy outside, because it would lower his status. He wanted to be a wise prince, and being able to tolerate his subjects was his greatest advantage. When it was about time, Li Chitian took Xiong Jinshui to Xi'an Palace. Who knew that as soon as they arrived at the palace gate, they saw the courtyard of Xi'an Palace decorated with lanterns and colored banners from afar. At first glance, Li Chitian thought that he was celebrating the new year. At the palace gate, the palace maid of Xi'an Palace saw Li Chitian from afar and hurriedly ordered someone to inform the Empress Dowager. The others all knelt down and saluted. "This servant pays her respects to Your Majesty." With a cold face, He strode into the courtyard of Sion Palace. Even the palace maids' clothes and clothes. Even the palace maids, who usually dressed and SSSSSS and SSSS. 2. SSSSSST. Li Chitian became even angrier when he thought of how the common people worshipped Pang Xiao as a god of war and even forgot that he was the emperor of Daju. When it came to Pang Xiao matters, one was always the bane of the other. From Tian Jiz's criticism of the imperial star to the current situation, Li Chitian was almost numb to Pang Xiao matters. However, when it came to the situation in the Sion Palace, all that was left was unwillingness. Because these ignorant women who didn't know anything about the situation wouldn't understand at all if you tried to reason with them. Instead, you would only end up angering yourself to death. Brother, you're here. Upon hearing the palace servant's message, Li Helan quickly walked out to greet her. She bent her knees and bowed. Her exquisitely made-up face looked very festive. Li Chitian suppressed his anger and answered, yes. Li Helan smiled and said, the Daju dynasty is finally peaceful again. This is all thanks to Imperial Brother for giving our Lan a chance. Li Chitian cast a sidelong glance at Li Helan. I thought you would mention Pang Zhishi. Li Helan's expression showed a moment of displeasure, but in front of Li Chitian, she had always been able to control herself well. Imperial Brother, you must be joking. Jilan is the prince consort. It's good that you understand. Don't pester Pang Zhishi like before. Even though his entire family is dead, he really dotes on the Qin clan. You don't know this yet, do you? Li Chitian suddenly stopped and told Li Helan the news he had just heard. The Qin clan gave birth to a pair of twins. Li Helan's eyes widened and she stopped in her tracks. She said in disbelief, Imperial Brother, didn't their twins die? Yes, but the Qin clan is really good at giving birth. They gave birth to a pair of twins for Pang Zhishi. Li Chitian's heart was filled with jealousy, and he couldn't help but speak harshly. You've been married to Jilan for so long. She has 2 children and 4. Look at yourself. You're also a woman. Why can't you do it? Li Helan's face flushed red. She bit her lip and looked up at Li Chitian in disbelief. When Li Chitian saw Li Helan like this, he strangely felt much better. He walked all the way to the main hall. The imperial concubines and the empress were all gathered here. Everyone was dressed in bright clothes and they all bowed when they saw Li Chitian. Li Chitian's eyes swept over the imperial concubines who were like flowers, especially those who were dressed more jubilantly than the new year. The irritation in his heart was about to reach its peak. The empress knew Li Chitian the best. She knew that he had always been jealous of Pang Zhishi, so she didn't plan to come today. However, she couldn't disobey the Empress Dowager's orders. She also couldn't tell Li Chitian's thoughts to the public. When she saw Li Chitian's expression, her heart skipped a beat. She quickly retreated without leaving a trace. Imperial Mother. Li Chitian bowed to the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager was wearing a peacock blue robe and a full set of golden cicada head ornaments. Her entire face was glowing, as if she had suddenly become 10 years younger. When she saw Li Chitian, she helped her son up with a smile. Quickly get up, quickly get up. Your Majesty's ability is great. He arranged for the right people. Tayton was driven out so quickly. When I heard the news, I was very happy. Let's celebrate today. Your Majesty shouldn't only care about government affairs. Take this as a chance to rest. When the Empress heard the Empress Dowager say this, she knew that Li Chitian wouldn't be happy. She lowered her head even more and carefully thought about how she should leave early. Li Chitian suppressed his impatience and said a few words to the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager said with emotion, after all, we are friends who fought together. Although Pang Zhishi is sometimes a bit arrogant, he is still very capable when it comes to fighting. How does Your Majesty plan to reward him this time? The string in Li Chitian's heart that was stretched taut had been touched several times when he accompanied the Empress Dowager to talk about the front line. Now that he heard this, he finally broke out after enduring for a long time. He's just doing what he should do and doing what he should do. If this court official does what he should do and comes to me for a reward, how should I deal with him? Li Chitian's tone was too cold. The entire side hall was originally filled with laughter, but as soon as these words came out, it immediately became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The Empress Dowager blinked several times to completely suppress the shock of being humiliated by her son in public. She then realized that she seemed to have misunderstood the Emperor's intention. The Empress Dowager smiled awkwardly and said, "The Emperor is right. I have lived in the palace for a long time and my knowledge is limited. There are some things that I don't understand. If I have said something wrong, please don't blame me." All the concubines lowered their heads. No matter how stupid they were, they knew that no one could stand out at this time. Once they did, they might not have a chance to turn things around in this life. Li Chitian looked around and glanced at the concubines with dissatisfaction. Finally, his eyes fell on the Empress Dowager. Imperial Mother has lived in the palace for a long time and doesn't understand anything. Imperial Mother should know that internal energy is not allowed to interfere in politics, right? I didn't argue with Imperial Mother's clan about that matter in the past. Imperial Mother must have forgotten it already, right? The Empress Dowager's expression changed greatly and her hands trembled. Yes, the Emperor is right. I am old and don't understand too many things. I only said more because I care about the Emperor. Li Chitian sneered, "Is that so? Imperial Mother's health is important. You should think more about yourself. Xi'an Palace also has a small Buddhist hall. Later, I will have people decorate the Buddhist hall in a way that Imperial Mother likes. If you have nothing to do, you should stay in the Buddhist hall more. Eat vegetarian food, chant Buddhist scriptures, and copy scriptures. Only when your heart is calm can you be at peace. Don't you think so?" Li Chitian was grounding the Empress Dowager. The Empress lowered her head even more, afraid to meet Li Chitian's eyes. But Li Chitian didn't care how these concubines looked at him. He smiled and said, "You too, if you have nothing to do, you should cultivate your moral character. The imperial court is not rich right now, and the national treasury and internal funds are tight because of the war. But you all only know how to dress up like Chow Chow and walk around. Don't you have anything to do after eating? If you have time, you should do more needlework or chant Buddhist scriptures with the Empress Dowager. If you have nothing to do, don't walk around and cause trouble." Chun Xie obeys the Emperor's decree. The concubines knelt down in unison. Li Chitian stood up and brushed the non-existent dust off his robe. "Jin is busy with government affairs, so Jin will leave first." How could the Empress Dowager dare to ask about the family banquet? The Emperor had just said to be frugal, so she didn't dare to eat this family banquet. The Empress Dowager said that she was tired and told everyone to disperse. The Empress left Xi'an Palace and returned to her own Chenkuan Palace. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. Nyang Nyang, this servant heard that Prince Zhongshuren's consort gave birth to a pair of twins for Prince Zhongshuren. Who did you hear it from? It was the Emperor's little chamberlain who unintentionally said it. The Empress raised her hand and waved the head palace maid away. She smiled helplessly. No wonder the Emperor was so abnormal today. He couldn't hide his jealousy. Thinking of Pang Xiao, the Empress couldn't help but think of the time she spent with Pang Xiao on the other side of the suspension bridge. Now that she thought about it, it was simply a dream. But based on her understanding of Li Chitian, how could he vent his anger by just throwing a tantrum? Next, the Emperor would definitely do something to Pang Zhishi. And she was just a harem girl, so she couldn't help at all. The news that Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu worked together to expel the Taitan and drove them all the way out of Tianyu Pass spread all over the capital. For a time, the fame of Prince Zhongshuren and Duke Dinggua's god of war was in the limelight. Even the ignorant children knew that when they grew up, they would be brave like Prince Zhongshuren and serve the country and the people. The spies kept inquiring about the people's opinions and it continuously passed into Li Chitian's ears. He felt that his patience was reaching its limit. He couldn't give Pang Xiao another chance to perform. Chapter 1140. Your Majesty, this official thinks that this matter is inappropriate. At the imperial court, the officials were very surprised by Li Chitian's decision. The more straightforward ones, who had argued with Li Chitian many times about Pang Xiao becoming the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, immediately stood up. The Taytan invaded our land and slaughtered our people. How can their crimes be washed clean by expelling them from Daju? Yes, Your Majesty. Someone seconded. This official thinks that now is the time to pursue the victory and eliminate future troubles. Since the Taytan have already made a move against Daju, they should be prepared to suffer the retaliation of our Daju soldiers. If we can't kill all the evil Taytan, how can the imperial court explain to the people who were persecuted by the Taytan? This time, the Taytan traveled all the way from Tianyu Pass to the outside of the capital. Along the way, they burned, killed, looted, and didn't shrink from any crime. They slaughtered many cities. Later on, those who were willing to follow Prince Zhongshuren to fight the Tartans did so for revenge. If Your Majesty doesn't agree, first, you will let the tiger return to the mountain and waste the advantage that Prince Zhongshuren gained. Second, you won't be able to explain to so many people, and the people's discussion won't be good. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Many officials echoed in unison. Li Chitian gritted his teeth and clenched his fists to prevent himself from scolding in front of the imperial court and degrading his status as the emperor. However, the anger in his heart was already showing signs of setting the prairie ablaze. Li Chitian didn't want to show his irritable side in front of others, so it was extremely difficult for him to suppress his emotions and endure. Seeing that the emperor didn't say anything, many officials who knew Li Chitian's temperament realized that today's topic wasn't the emperor's favorite. Even the most upright officials saw that the emperor was so silent and knew that there must be a reason behind it. The imperial court was silent for a while. After a long time, Li Chitian said, "My beloved officials, your words are reasonable. If I don't take revenge for the Taytan's rebellion, I'm afraid everyone in the world will call me a coward. We should also empathize with those who treat revenge as their spiritual pillar." Li Chitian's voice was extremely calm. However, the ministers could already tell from his tone that something was wrong. Tianzi wasn't someone who was easy to negotiate with. He had shown a great desire for power and control in the affairs of the court. Now that he was actually speaking according to the wishes of his subjects, everyone knew that there must be something else going on. Sure enough, Li Chitian said, "Dear ministers, is there a way to satisfy both sides?" This question seemed to be unclear, but Li Chitai's fans immediately understood what the emperor meant. Immediately, someone stood out and said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, this subject has a different opinion from the other lords. Prince Zhongshuren already had a record of colluding with the ministers inside and outside the court, as well as the wealthy commoners, to oppose the imperial court. At that time, if Prince Zhongshuren didn't order people to monopolize the provisions, with Duke Dinggua's ability, how could the Tartars attack? This subject agrees. Prince Zhongshuren privately brought his troops here, but unexpectedly it was so easy for him to beat back the enemy. It's hard to say that he didn't have any shady deals with the Tartars in the dark. Perhaps all of this is just an act. Right now, the Southern Pacifying Army alone has gathered more than 400,000 people. If Prince Zhongshuren wants to rebel, I'm afraid he will be caught unprepared." Fart, fart. Big stinky fart. Some generals couldn't bear to hear this person's foul language maliciously smearing Pang Xiao's name. They immediately jumped out and pointed at the several ministers who spoke in front of them and angrily roared, "If it weren't for Prince Zhongshuren, would you still be standing here slandering him today? When he was fighting for the country, you were raised by the Prince Zhongshuren like vermin. What qualifications do you have to stand out and slander Prince Zhongshuren? Boorish man. A boorish man like you speaking in front of your Majesty is simply dirtying your Majesty's ears. You are the treacherous minister who is full of shit. Despicable." Li Chitian rubbed his temples. Listening to the people below arguing about Pang Xiao, he became more and more impatient. If it was a normal day, he would be able to keep calm. However, these days, things didn't go his way. Li Chitian was so angry that he wished he could directly capture Pang Xiao and kill him. Now, looking at the noisy ministers below, and then looking at those cunning old foxes who refused to express their opinions, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. No matter how they discussed it, it was always like this. When it came to Pang Xiao, there was no smooth sailing. Li Chitian covered his mouth and coughed. Xiong Jinshui's forehead was already covered in sweat. Seeing Your Majesty's movements, he immediately shouted, "Quiet." The ministers who were originally expressing their own opinions immediately stopped arguing. They didn't dare to say another word in front of the emperor. Li Chitian said the second half of what he wanted to say with satisfaction. Prince Zhongshiren has really worked hard in this fierce battle against Tayton. I can't bear to let him continue to risk his life on the front line. In addition, I haven't seen him these days, and I really miss him very much. Therefore, I have decided to give full authority to pursue Tayton to Duke Dingguo and urgently summon Prince Zhongshiren back to the capital to report on his work. I don't know what you think. Everyone's heart skipped a beat when they heard this. They all understood that Your Majesty was planning to punish the meritorious ministers. A straightforward general immediately shouted, "Your Majesty, this minister thinks that replacing Prince Zhongshiren at the last minute is a great disadvantage for Daju. Tayton has long been scared witless. If you call people now, I'm afraid that Tayton will rise from the ashes again." A minister who figured out His Majesty's intention immediately retorted, "Isn't Duke Dingguo a brave and good god of war? You are doubting Duke Dingguo's ability and also doubting Your Majesty's decision. You're a pedantic scholar who is simply twisting words and forcing logic. Your Majesty is doing this for the stability of the imperial court, not for a certain person. If you want to take advantage of this opportunity to use Your Majesty's hand to eliminate dissidents, then you're wrong." Seeing that the ministers were about to quarrel again, Li Chitian's impatience was almost written on his face. Silence. Xiong Jinshui observed Li Chitian's expression. Seeing that Li Chitian was so unhappy, he hurriedly shouted to stop the ministers quarreling. Everyone raised their eyes to look at Li Chitian, who was sitting on the imperial steps, and realized that Your Majesty didn't seem to want Prince Zhongshiren to continue guarding the border. It's just that the war is almost over. When it's almost time to award the merit, Your Majesty is remote and doesn't want Prince Zhongshiren to finish the war, as if he's afraid that he'll get some merit. However, the emperor was already displeased. Since he was willing to make such a request, he had already made a decision. No matter how much they said, they couldn't change the fact. Instead, they would anger the emperor. No one knew what would happen. Even the most reckless people knew that they couldn't continue to anger the emperor. Therefore, under the emperor's high and mighty gaze, no one dared to refute. Li Chitian's decree was immediately drafted into a memorial. With the excuse of letting Prince Zhongshiren recuperate, he urgently summoned Prince Zhongshiren back to the capital. The decree was sent to the border at top speed. At this time, Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu's group had just finished a battle. The Tayton people had set up their tents far away. Under the sunlight, the white tents looked like a sea of foam. Ji Ziyu looked into the distance and then sighed in a low voice, "Fortunately, we seized the opportunity and drove them out. Otherwise, it's hard to say who would win and who would lose." Pang Xiao nodded and smiled, "That's right. With Lu Heng here, it's really hard to say what will happen on the battlefield." Just as the two of them quietly let out a sigh of relief, Huzi led a young eunuch over with a serious expression. It was the young eunuch's first time delivering an imperial decree. As soon as he saw Pang Xiao, he was immediately intimidated by the biting cold aura around him. He was so scared that his legs and stomach cramped. He was afraid that he couldn't even speak a complete sentence. Pang Xiao knew that these eunuchs who delivered imperial decrees would cause displeasure on both sides if they encountered an imperial decree from Your Majesty. An experienced eunuch would never rush out. Thinking about it, this young eunuch in front of him was only 16 or 17 years old. He was considered young in the harem. "Wang Yi. This servant is here to deliver Your Majesty's decree." The young eunuch presented the decree with both hands. This surprised Pang Xiao. After all, every time Xiong Jinshui came to deliver a message, he would carefully read the imperial decree. He didn't care if Your Majesty's words were reasonable or not. He had to be careful not to let the young eunuchs see any clues. At that time, Xiong Jinshui would use a high and mighty tone to choose him. Pang Xiao opened the imperial decree and read 10 lines at a glance. He raised his sword-like eyebrows. Ji Zheyu saw Pang Xiao's abnormality and couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Does your majesty have other orders?" "Your majesty wants me to return to the palace. He says that he's afraid that I'll be too tired here. He wants me to immediately rush back to the capital to recuperate." Ji Zheyu raised his eyebrows and took the letter. He looked at it and asked, "What do you plan to do? Do you really want to return to the capital?" Pang Xiao's expression didn't change as he lowered his eyes. "If I really go back this time, I'm afraid that I won't be able to come out in the future." Ji Zheyu's expression darkened. He cast a sidelong glance at the young eunuch standing to the side. The young eunuch trembled in fear and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Ji Zheyu whispered in Pang Xiao's ear, "You also think that this trip is bad?" "Yes." Pang Xiao shook the imperial decree. It's a big taboo in the military to change the commander in the middle of a battle. The emperor also came from a military background. It's impossible that he doesn't know this. But he still issued such a decree. This means that he has already made up his mind. I think that something must have provoked the emperor and made him make such a decision. Ji Zheyu thought for a moment and said, "At the very least, it's jealousy." Pang Xiao smiled bitterly. "What do I have to make others jealous? The emperor's personality is like that. He doesn't look at what he has. He only looks at what others have more than him. Let's not talk about other things. The emperor is selfish and weak, and your Qin clan just gave birth to a pair of twins for you. The Son of Heaven delayed the war for his own selfish reasons, but you led the army to drive the Tartars out of the Great Jew. This kind of comparison is enough to make the Son of Heaven hold a grudge." Pang Xiao couldn't help but admit that Ji Zheyu's words were right. But he felt that even if Li Qiqian was jealous, he would do his best to suppress it in front of others. He wouldn't be in such a hurry to change the commander and summon him back to the capital. He wouldn't even care about his reputation. This was enough to show the danger this time. Ji Zheyu asked, "What do you plan to do? Are you really going to accept the imperial decree and go back?" Pang Xiao hesitated for a moment. If he didn't go back, Li Qiqian would have something to say. They could accuse him however they wanted. Because he wasn't in the capital, he couldn't control what people said. If something bad were to spread, his reputation would be completely ruined. But if he went back, Pang Xiao knew that this time, it wouldn't bode well. Chapter 1141. Ji Zheyu could hear the resistance in Pang Xiao's words. He smiled and said, "As the saying goes, a general can't obey orders when he's abroad. Your Majesty is far away in the capital and doesn't know that this is a critical time for the war. If we relax a little, the Taitan with the support of the Lu family will make a comeback. Then, all our efforts these days will be in vain." As Ji Zheyu spoke, his eyes were like knives piercing the servant who delivered the decree. The servant understood Ji Zheyu's meaning. When he heard the conversation between Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu clearly, the servant felt that he might not be able to keep his life. Now that he was directly asked to deliver such a message, the servant was about to cry. If he was lucky enough to survive this time, he would find fault with your Majesty. He would rather scrub the toilet than do such a dangerous thing. Prince Zhongshuren and Duke Dinghua were in front of him. If they said so, he could only nod and agree if he wanted to live. Yes, although this servant doesn't know much, I have seen the ferocity of the Tartans. If it weren't for Wang Yi and Duke Dinghua fighting desperately, the Tartans would have broken in. Pang Xiao smiled. He didn't want to make things difficult for the servant. He nodded and said, "It's good that you know. Go and have a good rest. You can leave tomorrow." "Yes." The little attendant bowed respectfully and left quietly. Ji Zheyu pursed his lips and looked at the servant's back with his hands behind his back. This person can't be left alive. It's nothing. He's just a servant. No matter what he says or doesn't say, it won't affect your Majesty's attitude towards me. He will still be suspicious. Although this was the truth, Ji Zheyu felt uneasy leaving such a person alive. Pang Xiao patted him on the shoulder. "Although we're at war and our hands are stained with a lot of blood, we still have to stick to our bottom line. If we treat killing as nothing, we'll gradually lose respect for life in the future, which will directly affect the way we do things in the future. You're always so reasonable. Ji Ziyu turned to look at Pang Xiao. His tone was complaining, but his eyes were filled with admiration. It was precisely because of such perseverance that he was able to maintain his original heart for so many years without being disturbed by external matters. Pang Xiao clasped his hands behind his back and pondered for a moment. He said, "I think your Majesty will definitely be furious this time. He might even order people to arrest me. What's worse, he might even go after Sister Yi and my children. We can't wait any longer. We have to get them to leave." Ji Ziyu nodded. "That's exactly what I wanted to say. Your child is more important. Send someone over now." Pang Xiao nodded. He immediately selected all of the Jinghu Wei who were following him and had Tang Xiu lead them to Jinggang. When Qin Yining found out that Pang Xiao had openly defied the imperial edict and refused to return to the capital to report on his work, Li Qitian was already furious and made things difficult for him. Because Qin Yining took the children and asked Magistrate Chen for help, Magistrate Chen specially arranged for the bailiffs to step up their patrols and closely observe the area around Qin Yining. They did indeed find a few unfamiliar men, but since they didn't make any moves, they couldn't act rashly. On this day, Magistrate Chen also received news from the imperial court and specially came to ask about Qin Yining. Wang Yi is wholeheartedly devoted to Daeju, but his actions are too thoughtless. He could have complied with the imperial edict first and explained everything to Your Majesty when he returned to the capital. At that time, Your Majesty naturally wouldn't make things difficult for Wang Yi. But now, there's been a misunderstanding and Your Majesty mistakenly thought that Wang Yi defied the imperial edict and disrespected Your Majesty. Magistrate Chen shook his head repeatedly, looking very regretful. However, Qin Yining thought deeper. Pang Xiao was a thorn in Li Qitian's side. This time, when victory was at hand, he urgently summoned Pang Xiao back to the capital. He didn't want to give Pang Xiao any reward at all. He even had the intention of punishing him. This vividly displayed Li Qitian's radical side. In the past, Li Qitian would restrain himself for the sake of his reputation and various other reasons. But now, it seemed that he was increasingly unable to restrain his anger. Qin Yining was a bit worried. Your Majesty was a ruthless person. If he and the children stayed here, it was very likely that they would become the target of Li Qitian's revenge against Pang Xiao. Qin Yining smiled and said to Magistrate Chen, "Thank you, Magistrate Chen, for specially informing me of this matter. It's just that Wang Yi is the one who makes the decisions regarding the war. Wang Yi can do whatever he wants. I'm just a woman, so I don't know so much. In the next few days, I also want to take the children out for a walk. Magistrate Chen, you've helped us a lot along the way. I still don't know how to thank you." Magistrate Chen's old face turned red. He shook his head and said, "What are you saying, Your Highness? Compared to what Wang Yi and Your Highness have done, what I've done is really nothing. If Your Highness wants to go out for a walk, it's good. You can also relax a little. Perhaps when Your Highness has had enough fun and comes back, Wang Yi and the others will return triumphantly." "That's right." Qin Yining smiled and said, "They were able to drive the Taitan out of Daeju's territory. In the future, as long as they manage it well, the Daeju dynasty will have good weather and the country will be prosperous and the people will be at peace." "Your Highness is right." Magistrate Chen nodded in agreement. Then he asked, "When does Your Highness plan to go out? This lowly official will arrange for a few bailiffs to accompany you in case something goes wrong. Although we are still far away from the Taitan, we don't know if there will be an ambush during the war." Qin Yining smiled gratefully and said, "There's no need for that. After all, Jinggang is also a city that was fought for. The bailiffs are already very busy. Wang Yi has arranged for some of his guards to be with me. With them looking after me, my safety should be guaranteed." County Magistrate Chen nodded his head and agreed, "That's true. The bodyguards around His Highness are naturally top-notch experts. It's good that Your Highness' safety is guaranteed." After discussing with Magistrate Chen, Qin Yining immediately went to find Xie Yu. "Sir Xie, I have a bad feeling. Wang Yi refused to return to the capital, and it's not a secret that I gave birth to twins of a boy and a girl. I'm just afraid that someone will target me and the children. Your Highness is right. Xie Yu said with a serious expression. I didn't think that the most difficult problem to solve, the problem of rations, would be solved so easily, but something like this would happen. Your Highness should quickly order people to make arrangements and bring more guards. Just as Qin Yining nervously ordered people to prepare for departure and planned to leave Jinggang to lie low for a while, the news of Pang Xiao's disobedience was spread throughout the court. Li Qitian had originally been very proud. Pang Xiao's support among the people was so great. He didn't believe that the people would think if they knew that Pang Xiao was someone who disrespected the imperial court. But things did not go as smoothly as Li Qitian had imagined. Li Qitian was dressed like a young master from a wealthy family. He brought Xiong Jinshui, who was disguised as an attendant, and several secret agents, who were dressed as guards, along the streets of the capital. When they passed by a tea house, they sat down and ordered a pot of hot tea. The tea house was a place for the common people to chat and kill time. For a few copper coins, they could drink good tea and eat good snacks. Sometimes, they could listen to stories, and sometimes they could talk with friends. Today, the storyteller was not present, but the tea house was still very lively. Everyone was discussing Da Ju's defeat of the Taitan. Prince Zhongshuren is really a brave god of war. It seems that many people are not lying when they say that Prince Zhongshuren is brave and fierce. Yes, if it weren't for Prince Zhongshuren, the Taitan would have already invaded the capital. Your Majesty arranged for Prince Zhongshuren to take a detour. In fact, it was not appropriate. He should have opened the gates to welcome Prince Zhongshuren and his people. Then, perhaps the battle with the Taitan would have already ended. When Li Qitian heard this, he couldn't help but frown. Xiong Jinshui and the secret agents lowered their heads, not daring to look at Li Qitian's expression. These old people had nothing to do after eating. Instead of going home to lie down like corpses, they went to the tea house to talk nonsense. They really didn't care about their lives. At this time, another old man said, "This time, in order to strike while the iron is hot, Prince Zhongshuren directly beat the Tartans until they didn't dare to provoke Da Ju. He had no choice but to disobey Your Majesty's decree. I don't know if Your Majesty will blame him or not." As he said this, the group of people shook their heads and sighed. Whether or not Pang Xiao would be convicted was what they were most concerned about right now. Li Qitian expressionlessly picked up the teacup and took a sip. Xiong Jinshui really wanted to shout for silence, just like he did in court. But right now, he could only pretend that he didn't understand. He lowered his head and didn't dare to move. Maybe Your Majesty is just concerned about Wang Yi's health. In the future, Wang Yi will have to fight to expand his territory. Your Majesty might just want Wang Yi to come back and recuperate well, so as to avoid overworking himself and hurting his foundation. Not necessarily. I think that Prince Zhongshuren might have affected some people's interests. Wang Yi is so outstanding. It's normal for him to have an impact on others. If some people are jealous, naturally, some people will complain to Your Majesty. Bah, there's really such a shameless person. These people had forgotten who had saved their lives. It's not the time to be scared witless by the Taitan army at the city gates. It's only been a few days, but they're going to complain to Prince Zhongshuren in the blink of an eye. Aren't they afraid that their immoral son won't have a dick? Li Qitian clenched his fists. Although he didn't show anything strange on his face, he didn't stay in the tea house for long before he suddenly ordered a carriage to be prepared to return to the palace. The louder the voices of the people, the greater Pang Xiao's influence, and the angrier Li Qitian became. After thinking about it, he called the spies over. "Do you know where the Qin clan is right now?" Replying to Your Majesty, "I didn't dare to forget your orders. I've always ordered people to closely monitor Prince Zhongshuren's consort." "Good." Li Qitian's index finger quickly tapped on the table, making a loud and clear sound. Not long after, the sound came to an abrupt stop. Li Qitian said, "Go, capture the Qin clan and everyone around them, including their twins." "Yes." The spy accepted the order and respectfully retreated. However, when they arrived outside the tea house, they thought about the complicated relationship between Prince Zhongshuren and Your Majesty. Everyone who knew about the situation couldn't help but sigh. Jinggang wasn't far from the capital, so Qin Yining didn't have much time to prepare. Fortunately, she made preparations in advance, so she was able to remain calm. Chapter 1142. Qin Yining held brother Xian in his arms and leaned against the soft pillow in the carriage. He frowned and said softly, "Don't worry. Let's take action first and wait and see what happens." "Yes." Ji Yun nodded. Even though she felt uneasy, seeing Qin Yining so calm and knowing that Jinghu Wei and the spies were still around, she relaxed a little. However, Qin Yining had a bad feeling. She had always been a sensitive person. Staying in the mountains, she had a clear sense of danger. She had used this sense to avoid many dangers. This time, when she was talking to Magistrate Chen, she made the decision to leave Golden Harbor immediately. When she returned home, she hurriedly ordered people to make preparations and fled with her men. At this moment, she was still in a state of panic, as if a knife was hanging over her head, ready to fall at any moment. She hadn't felt such a clear sense of danger for many years. Qin Yining just didn't want to appear panicked and disturb others. "Wang Fei, where are we going?" Qin Yining pursed his lips and said, "We're going to find our warship." Ji Yun said in surprise, "Wang Fei plans to go to Water Zi country to lie low? No matter if we go to Water Zi country or not, we feel safer on the sea than here. When we first chose to stay in Golden Harbor, we considered this point. Wang Yi has arranged for people to look after the warship. The warship has also prepared fresh water and dry food all year round. It should last us for a while." Bing Tang smiled and said, "That's a good idea. I don't believe that Your Majesty's people can fly over." Qin Yining heard how relaxed she was and couldn't help but smile. His tense mind finally relaxed a little. However, they didn't immediately go straight to the point. After leaving Golden Harbor, they nervously took a detour. They planned to shake off their pursuers before going to the warship. The weather was cold. Since Golden Harbor was in the north, winter was naturally more intense. It was cold and windy in December. Qin Yining was sitting in the car with her child in her arms. She was burning a small charcoal stove, and she even had to wrap herself in a fox fur coat. She was also afraid that the bad air in the charcoal stove would affect brother Xian and sister Yun's health, so she especially opened the car window a crack to let in the cold wind. She leaned to the side to block the wind for the children. After walking for 2 days, the journey was safe and smooth, which made everyone relax a little. "Your Highness, there's a village up ahead. It's getting late, so let's stay here and rest for the night. We can change our route tomorrow," Xie Yu said with a smile outside the carriage. Qin Yining smiled and said, "That would be great. Thank you for making the arrangements." Xie Yu instructed Jinghu Wei to scout the way to the village. On the other hand, Qin Yining's team slowed down. Not long after, Jinghu Wei rushed back. The village is called Yangjiao Village. There are only 20 or so families inside. Because the days are short during winter, there aren't many people walking around. We only found out after knocking on the door of one of the families. We spent a bit more money and that family agreed to let us stay for the night. "That's good." Xie Yu agreed. Seeing that there was nothing wrong, she led the team in the direction of Yangjiao Village. After the carriage traveled for a few zhong, large snowflakes floated down from the sky. They were carried by the cold wind and fluttered in the face. Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, and the others who were following the carriage couldn't help but raise their arms to cover their faces. The wind and snow blew in through the crack in the window. Qin Yining quickly leaned over to protect the child in her arms. Ji Yun turned around to close the window. It's suddenly snowing heavily. "We came at the right time. It didn't snow on the way here." Bing Tang smiled and gently coaxed the baby in her arms. Qin Yining smiled and nodded, "That's right. Fortunately, it's snowing heavily and we've already found a place to stay." The others couldn't help but smile. The group quickly arrived at the village. Xie Yu got off the carriage first and went to negotiate with the family that had agreed to let them stay the night. She quickly returned and smiled, "Wang Fei, please get off the carriage." Qin Yining nodded and wrapped the swaddling cloth properly. He supported Ji Yun's hand as they got off the carriage. Bing Tang followed behind, also carrying a large red swaddling cloth. She used her cotton cloak to protect the child in her arms and followed behind Qin Yining. Later, boil a pot of ginger soup and let everyone have some. It's really tiring to eat and sleep in the open. The weather is cold. It's better if everyone doesn't catch a cold. Yes. Bing Tang smiled and nodded. Don't worry. Your body is the weakest here. Before Bing Tang could finish her sentence, she suddenly saw a flash of silver from the corner of her eye. It was so dazzling that she couldn't help but raise her sleeve to block it. Before she could react, Jingzhe and the others had already turned around and shouted, "There's an ambush. Wang Fei, let's go." Qin Yining's heart skipped a beat. She carried the child and turned to leave. But at the same time, masked men dressed in black came from all directions with swords in their hands. Their footsteps were very light and silent. It was obvious that they were experts. Jinghu Wei, Jingzhe, Liao Zhibing, and the others immediately surrounded Qin Yining, Xie Yu, Master Zhong, and the others. They carefully observed these people. Xie Yu was so anxious that her face turned pale. "Wang Fei, I didn't realize it just now. It's not your fault. Let's think of a way to break out of this encirclement first." Qin Yining hugged her infant and hid with her back to back with Bing Tang. There were more than 100 masked men in black surrounding them. They quickly surrounded the few dozen of them. Pang Xiao had arranged for 10 Jinghu Wei, 4 silver-masked spies, and a few of Liao Zhibing's brothers. These were the only people in their group who could fight. Against more than 100 people, how could they possibly win? "Go." One of the men in black gave the order. The others immediately rushed forward. Jingzhe, Liao Zhibing, and the others immediately surrounded Qin Yining. Jinghu Wei roared and raised their swords to fight. "Quick, find a chance to escape." The other party coldly ordered, "Master has ordered that no one is allowed to escape. Capture all of them." "Yes." The men in black were unwilling to back down and swarmed forward. Qin Yining's vision was blurred in the wind and snow. She was protected in the middle and could only see that everyone was fighting to the death. Brother Xian and Sister Yun were probably frightened by the sounds of fighting and killing. They woke up with a start and cried loudly. The children's cries were crisp and clear. The sound of the children's cries could be heard throughout the quiet village. Qin Yining's heart ached. It was freezing cold and the children were crying in the snow. She was really afraid that the children would get sick from the cold. She hurriedly used her fox fur coat to protect the children in her arms. Jinghu Wei and the silver-masked spies heard the children's cries and fought with all their might. But this time, they could see that the other party was an expert and had come prepared. They were on par with them in terms of fighting skills, and some of them were even more skilled than them. They had already done their best, and the other party was also well coordinated. They were determined to capture them. Jingzhe's eyes immediately turned red. "Fight them to the death." "Yes." The other spies and Jinghu Wei agreed in unison. Everyone fought with all their might and fought a bloody path out of the encirclement. They fought and retreated, protecting Qin Yining as they broke out of the encirclement. But who knew that they had only taken a few steps when they were met with a group of armored cavalry. They were all wearing the uniform of the Jingji guards. The sound of the horses' hooves trampled the snow on the ground into mud. When Qin Yining heard that the other party wanted to capture them alive, she knew that it must be Li Qitian's men who had chased them here. Now that she saw the Jingji guards, who could only come here because of the emperor's orders, how could she not understand? She hurriedly led her men into a side alley. Just as they turned around, a group of young men dressed as commoners rushed up and blocked the path of the pursuers. "Princess consort, leave quickly." Qin Yining found these people unfamiliar. But the few Jinghu Wei beside her looked familiar. "Princess consort, these are the new faces that we found in the city earlier." Those young men blocked the Jingji guards' cavalry with their bare hands. Hearing this, the leader couldn't help but say, "Our master ordered us to protect Princess Consort's safety." "Princess Consort, leave quickly." Qin Yining was even more puzzled. "Master?" Among the people she knew, Lu Heng and Qiu Feishan were the only ones who could be called master. Qiu Feishan's relationship with Qiu Yuanqing was still unclear, so she couldn't be called the master of the Qiu family. So these people were sent by Lu Heng. Qin Yining didn't have time to be surprised. She turned around and fled with the child. Bing Tang and the others followed closely behind her. Jinghu Wei, the silver-masked spy, and the people arranged by Lu Heng tried their best to resist the pursuers. But Qin Yining and her men were outnumbered. The Jingji guards had more than 100 people, and they were all cavalry. They only needed to send a part of them to outflank Qin Yining. Qin Yining looked at the Jingji guards' cavalry standing in front of her on a tall horse. She couldn't help but hug the child tighter, and the child cried even louder. The person sitting on the horse was expressionless. "Come, take her down." "Yes." Everyone jumped off their horses and swarmed up. Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, and Jinghu Wei had already been entangled, but they couldn't resist the enemy's numbers. Seeing Qin Yining being blocked, they couldn't do anything else. Qin Yining hugged the baby tightly and stepped back step by step. But the other party didn't show any mercy. Dozens of Jingji guards swarmed up, and Qin Yining and her men were immediately pressed to the ground. The baby in Qin Yining and Bing Tang's arms was also taken away. "Give the child back to me. Let him go." Qin Yining suddenly raised her head and looked at the baby with red eyes. But the Jingji guards didn't care. They each held a red baby in their arms, and their postures were very casual. Bing Tang's baby was also taken away. She was so scared that tears flowed out of her eyes. She cried and roared, "If you have the ability, come at us." "What ability do you have to hurt a baby in his arms? Those are Prince Zhongxian's children. If you hurt them, Wang Yi won't let you off when he comes back." Ji Yun also roared angrily. Qin Yining roared until her voice was hoarse. Her red eyes made her look particularly ugly. The other party didn't take pity on her and pressed her face against the snow. This way, they wouldn't have to look at her ferocious expression. But Qin Yining still refused to give up. She was like a fish that had jumped out of a pond. She struggled desperately on the ground, and her voice was hoarse from screaming. Chapter 1143. Your child. What are you thinking? A Jingji guard grabbed Qin Yining's hair and turned her face towards him. There was an almost twisted smile on his dark face. These men were born in the military and were loyal to Li Chitian. Although they weren't ordinary people, they weren't people of high status either. They were ambitious and weren't willing to be under others. Normally, when they saw people like Pang Xiao, they had to bow. Even if she was a woman, as long as she married into a noble family, they had to be courteous. Today, he was able to hold a noble and beautiful woman like Qin Yining in the palm of his hand and make her kneel on the ground and beg for mercy without any dignity. He felt unprecedentedly refreshed. "Let me tell you, the Son of Heaven has ordered us to capture you rebels alive. When we return to the capital, we will naturally punish you as rebels. If you know what's good for you, then don't talk too much. Otherwise, we will directly gag your mouths." Qin Yining's hair was grabbed by the man. Her hair was already messed up, and her long hair was stuck to her cheeks by her tears. Through her hair and tears, she looked at the people holding two swaddling clothes. Finally, she forced herself to soften her tone. "Fine, fine. You came with the wind, so you have to bring this king's consort and the heir back to report, right?" Sensing the other party's grip on her loosening, Qin Yining gritted her teeth and said, "Even if we want to convict, with my family's Wang Yi status, we still have to wait for your majesty to personally decide. Wang Yi doesn't have any other children. Right now, he only has one son and one daughter. In the future, the heir will definitely be this child. If something really happens, even if your majesty wants to arrest Prince Zhongxian and the heir, he won't be able to find them. You all know your majesty's temper." The Jingji guards and Li Chitian's spies looked at each other in dismay. They were all a bit shaken. "Forget it, we still have to keep them alive." The person who grabbed Qin Yining finally let go. But he still wasn't in a good mood. He turned and stroked Qin Yining's soft cheeks. "But if you want us to treat your child better, you have to give something in return, right?" His eyes greedily looked at Qin Yining's tear-stained face. Even though she was pressed to the ground in a sorry state, With her hair messed up and tears on her face, this woman was still an existence that they couldn't touch with. The Jingji guards on the side roared with laughter. That's right, that's right. This is Prince Zhongshan's woman. We've never seen such a beauty in our family. Qin Yining clenched her teeth and slapped her hard when that person wasn't paying attention. She didn't hold back her strength, and her physical strength was much greater than that of an ordinary woman due to her years of outside training. The person squatting in front of her immediately had a buzzing sound in her head. She sat down on the floor before she could even react to what had happened. You're not worthy. If you have the ability, kill me now. Let's see how your majesty will punish you if you can't hand over the Prince Zhongshan's consort when you return to the capital. You. The man who was hit had a palm print on his face. His eyes widened in anger as he raised his hand and slapped Qin Yining. She couldn't hear anything, bitch. I didn't let you die, but I didn't say I'd let you live. You're still so arrogant. Just wait for your head to be chopped off. The man wanted to hit Qin Yining again. Ji Yun and Bing Tang had already struggled to squeeze in. Even though their hands were tied, they couldn't stop their movements. Xie Yu, Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, and the others were even more furious. They used all their strength to struggle, but they couldn't do anything. The secret agent who had been watching from the side came forward with a sullen face. All right, that's enough. The Jingji guards and the secret agent were two different departments. Moreover, the secret agent was the emperor's trusted aide. Although the Jingji guards had a higher position, they still didn't dare to underestimate him. With the secret agent's words, the Jingji guards didn't dare to continue acting rashly. The secret agent who often followed Li Qitian said, Your Majesty's decree is to capture all of the Prince Zhongshan's family members alive. Therefore, we must bring everyone here back. If they're dead, Your Majesty might decide to use them, but he can't. At that time, whoever killed their subordinates will be punished. Yes. Everyone responded in unison. A trace of blood dripped from the corner of Qin Yining's mouth. When the slap came down, his teeth had cut his tongue, and the blood hadn't stopped flowing. However, at least he could temporarily relax. At the very least, their lives could be saved for the time being. Qin Yining's heart ached for the two babies in swaddling clothes. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. If they wanted to enter the capital, they would have to hurry. She could endure and make do with anything, but her children couldn't. You can leave the children to me. I can't escape. Isn't it troublesome for you to take care of the children yourselves? Blood dripped from the corner of Qin Yining's mouth and dripped onto her lapel and the ground, dyeing it red. The Jingji guards and the secret agent shook their heads at the same time. Prince Zhongshan's consort has a noble status. How can she do such rough work? Don't you have a wet nurse in your group? If you don't have one, then don't feed them. We'll just make do with it. You're despicable. Qin Yining knew that they wouldn't dare to kill her children. At least, before Li Qitian gave the order, they couldn't leave a single one of them behind. However, if these people wanted to make them suffer, it would be very easy for them to torture them without torturing the children to death. Qin Yining's curses didn't anger these people. Instead, it made them laugh. This time, the mission went too smoothly. Everyone shouted and tied Qin Yining's group with ropes, making them look like dumplings. The Jingji guards left behind 20 people to assist the secret agent. The rest of them rode their horses and returned to the capital ahead of time. The emperor's secret agent and the Jingji guards all had horses. They also arranged for the two wet nurses that Qin Yining had brought along to board their carriages and handed brother Xian and sister Yun to them. You guys, take good care of these two children. They're not allowed to starve or freeze to death. Otherwise, we'll kill your entire family as an apology. Yes, yes, yes. Sir, don't worry. We'll definitely take good care of them. The two wet nurses had long been scared out of their wits. They were locals of Jinggang and had received the grace of Qin Yining and Pang Xiao to survive. Now that they had the opportunity to protect their benefactor's children, they were very happy. However, they didn't dare to show it on their faces. When Qin Yining saw this scene, she was slightly relieved. Usually, when she needed to rest, she would let the wet nurses take care of the children. When she didn't have enough milk, she would let them feed her children. At least until they met Li Chitian, they could ensure the children's safety. However, Qin Yining's group was very difficult to deal with. Once Qin Yining was captured, Jing Zhe, Jing Hu Wei, and the others could only wait to be captured. They didn't dare to resist at all, for fear of harming their master's life. As for the people arranged by Lu Heng, because they were unarmed, more than half of them had already died. The remaining people saw that the situation was not good and quickly fled. There were already Beijing border guards chasing after them. At this time, it seemed that things were not looking good for them. Right now, they were all tied to a rope. The long line of people meandered along the snowy road. On both sides of the line were Beijing border guards and secret spies. Some of them were scouting the way, while others were guarding the back. The defense was tight. Qin Yining couldn't find a chance to escape. Qin Yining, who grew up in the south, couldn't adapt to this kind of weather. Sitting in the carriage, she had to wrap herself in a quilt and hug a hot water bottle. At this time, her feet were frozen to the point that they couldn't feel anything, but she still had to stagger forward in the snow. Qin Yining looked around. She was better off, but Jing Zhe and the others had taken off their cotton cloaks to make it easier for them to fight. At this time, they were wearing thin clothes. With the biting cold wind, she was really worried that something would happen to everyone. Fortunately, in this group, even Xie Yu was old but vigorous. Although Qin Yining was a woman, she received a lot of care from Bing Tang. Although she was weak for a while after giving birth, she was much better now. Ji Yun and Bing Tang didn't need to be mentioned. They gritted their teeth and persevered. They ate in the wind and slept in the open, braving the snow to move forward. In any case, no one was left behind. When they returned to the gate of the capital, it was the last day of the 9th year. The city stood majestically. The wasteland outside the city was covered in a thick layer of white. Qin Yining's feet and hands were frostbitten. Every step she took hurt and itched. Seeing that they were in front of the city gate, but still unable to escape, the haze in her heart increased. She felt even colder. In Li Chitian's hands, they became Pang Xiao's weakness. Qin Yining didn't want to become a bargaining chip to threaten Pang Xiao, but so many of her subordinates had been captured. Her child was also captured. At this time, she couldn't do whatever she wanted. Even if she wanted to end it all, she didn't have the right to do so. She still had to stand at the forefront of everyone and be the person who could resist. Come in. When they arrived at the city gate, the capital guards still didn't push open the gate. The left and right sides pulled the string of children and everyone was pulled into the city in a line. They ate in the wind and slept in the open. In the cold weather, their hair was messy and their clothes were dirty. When the commoners saw this scene, they couldn't help but whisper to each other. When someone saw Qin Yining in the crowd, they whispered, "Ayo, which family is this criminal woman from? She's so beautiful." If she was sold as an official prostitute, it would be everyone's good fortune. That's right. That's right. Such a beautiful woman, we usually don't see her. Bah. Watch your words. Someone who recognized Qin Yining immediately scolded. That's Prince Zhengxian's consort. Prince Zhengxian was fighting on the front lines, but Prince Zhengxian's family was captured. What is the meaning of this? Have you forgotten who defeated the Tartars and didn't let the Tartars take half a step into the capital? If it wasn't for Prince Zhengxian that day, Daju would have been destroyed. Now that you see his family here, you still dare to insult them. Are you still human? These words made everyone speechless. Someone mumbled, "We also don't recognize her." Chapter 1144. Go away, go away. The Jingji guards waved their whips to chase the people away. The fat woman who had spoken was also chased away. This is a serious criminal of the imperial court. Your Majesty has to deal with them personally. How can you decide whether or not they have water to drink? Do they listen to you or the Son of Heaven? The Jingji guards' voices were loud and domineering. The people only dared to speak when they saw that these people didn't say anything and didn't stop them from approaching. However, now that they saw this scene, how could they dare to speak? Even if they were dissatisfied and had a sense of justice, not everyone would be willing to take risks for the sake of justice in their hearts. Qin Yining lowered her eyes and restrained the contemplation in her eyes. The Jingji guards and secret agents realized that they had chosen the wrong time to enter the city. At this time, they didn't know what Your Majesty's decision would be. Although they felt that Your Majesty's request for Prince Zhongshiren to return to the capital wasn't a secret, they didn't ask for permission and could easily be blamed. Therefore, they immediately pushed Qin Yining's group to speed up. Go to the Ministry of Justice's prison first. Lock them up and wait for the Son of Heaven to deal with them. Yes. Everyone responded in unison and immediately pushed the group forward. Although the people on both sides of the road had objections when they saw this, no one dared to say anything this time. Qin Yining closed her eyes. Her messy long hair fell by her cheeks as she lowered her head. She staggered for a moment and then stood up straight with difficulty. However, everyone could see that Prince Zhongshiren's consort was very weak. Some people were already nervously clenching their fists. There were also people at the back of the group who stretched their necks and rushed forward. Qin Yining was already very tired from the journey. Her frost-bitten hands and feet, as well as the joints all over her body, were screaming in pain. Her hungry stomach was constricting and cramping from breathing too much cold air. However, she was too worried about her child, so she gritted her teeth and endured it all. Although she could continue to endure if she wanted to, she knew that she didn't need to. These people arranged by Li Chitian were too arrogant. Just like their master, they ignored the people's hearts. Now was the best time for her to create public opinion. Qin Yining gave up. She had been forcing herself to be numb and not care about the pain in her body. Now that she was indulging herself, the discomfort and weakness immediately drowned her like a tide. She staggered 2 steps and almost couldn't keep up with the group. Her footsteps were as heavy as lead. When the Jingji guards on the side saw Qin Yining slowed down and her body, they immediately assumed that she was plotting. Quickly. Stop pretending. Which one of you can take responsibility for delaying the Emperor's matters? The whip landed on Qin Yining's back. She had been beaten a lot along the way. There were whips, sticks, branches, and slaps. She forced herself to get used to it. But now, the defense in her heart was broken. The heavy whip landed on her back. It was so painful that her eyes turned black. Her legs gave way and she fell down. Wang Fei, how are you? Everyone exclaimed. Qin Yining's front and back were Bing Tang and Ji Yun. These people tied them to a rope. When she fell, Ji Yun and Bing Tang were the closest and were immediately pulled down. People in front and behind them also fell down. For a moment, the entire escort group was in chaos. Ji Yun screamed and hugged Qin Yining who had fallen down. She shouted mournfully, Wang Fei, Wang Fei. Bing Tang's face was also full of tears. She quickly checked Qin Yining's pulse. Xie Yu climbed up with difficulty. Her hands gripped the rope tightly. She shouted with tears in her eyes, Wang Yi fought for the country, but you captured Wang Yi's wife and child. Do you have any humanity? What did Wang Yi and Wang Fei do wrong? Along the way, you beat and scolded Wang Fei and humiliated her. Aren't you afraid that after you die, Wang Yi will put you in a pot of oil? Shut up. The Jingji guard stepped forward and kicked Xie Yu to the side. But Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, and the others would not agree. Even if their hands and arms were tied, they still resisted with their feet. For a moment, the streets were filled with horses neighing and people shouting. The sounds of fighting and insulting mixed together. The people in the capital were so scared that they retreated. There were also many people who felt a chill in their hearts when they saw this scene. The Taitan were driven out of Daju. Prince Zhongshiren's family immediately suffered such a situation. Wang Yi fought for the country, but he did not receive any praise or trust. Even when he led troops to rescue the Emperor did not even let him enter the city gates. Now that the battle situation had stabilized slightly, the Emperor urgently called Wang Yi back to the palace. Wang Yi wanted to continue fighting the Tartars, so the Emperor captured Wang Fei and Wang Yi's family and abused them like this. Even if the rabbit was killed and the hound was cooked, it shouldn't be so ugly, right? For the Emperor to do this, How could he live up to his conscience? The common people did not understand too much. After all, they did not have access to those secrets. But they maintained a kind heart. They knew right and wrong, and they knew the bottom line of a person's life. Normally, they might bicker with their neighbors over some small things, but when it came to the big picture, how could they not remember who had done something beneficial to the great Zhou dynasty? Seeing Wang Yi's family being abused like this, Wang Fei was so weak that she could not bear the burden. There was also the tragic cries of an infant in the carriage. Adding on the muffled sounds of punches hitting flesh when the Jingji guards beat the Wang Fu's family members. Was this still Jing? Was this still under the emperor's feet? Many common people almost didn't know where they were, and didn't know why they were here to watch such a farce. They didn't dare to say more because they were afraid of being implicated. But their respect for the emperor was gradually being wiped clean. All that was left was the shadow of the emperor abusing the family of a meritorious official. Stop, stop. All of you, stop. Go over there and arrest all the rebels. Everyone in the Pang family, immediately take them to the prison of the Ministry of Justice. The people from the warden's office of the 5 cities quickly arrived. A group of people charged into the crowd like Moses parting the sea. They separated the people who were fighting and punched and kicked Jing Zhe and the Wang Fu's people. They tied them up tightly with ropes. Qin Yining was still on the ground and could not get up. The other party could only cut off the rope tied to Qin Yining and tied Ji Yun to Bing Tang. Qin Yining's hands and feet were tied up and thrown into the carriage. Go! Someone ordered, and the group immediately moved forward. More than 100 people from the warden's office of the 5 cities came and isolated the common people who were watching on the street. Everyone looked in the direction where Qin Yining's carriage left. They were expressionless, as if they were not thinking about anything. But who could completely understand the people's hearts? Imperial study. Li Chitian frowned as he looked at the 3 rows of secret agents kneeling in front of him. So, you brought back Prince Zhongxian's family, but you also alarmed the common people in the city. Your Majesty, please calm down. At that time, Prince Zhongxian's concubine suddenly fainted and delayed the process. In addition, the steward of Prince Zhongxian's residence cried loudly, which aroused the common people's discussion. Everyone lowered their heads and didn't dare to look up at the emperor's expression. Li Chitian looked at this group of people, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. Idiots, a bunch of idiots. Your Majesty, please calm down. Everyone hurriedly kowtowed. Li Chitian sneered, you only know how to ask me to calm down after messing up your mission. Did you not bring your brains with you when you went out? Do you need me to analyze everything in detail? After capturing the Qin clan and bringing them back, you would have used your brains and known that Buddha should have announced it to the public. But you are really good, you actually made things like this. Your Majesty, we know our mistakes. Please forgive us, Your Majesty. The leader of the secret agents lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. Your Majesty, actually, when we caught Prince Zhongxian's consort, we encountered another strange thing. Oh, what is it? Li Chitian's attention was successfully diverted. Chapter 1145. Li Chitian looked down at the people in front of him suspiciously. He knew that these people were likely to talk nonsense in order to shirk responsibility. Seeing that the emperor was silent, the spies were afraid and hurriedly added to each other. Your Majesty, we would never dare to deceive Your Majesty. This matter is absolutely true. At that time, the group of people were not weak, but they did not carry weapons. Exactly. It can be seen that the group of people were secretly protecting Prince Zhongxian's consort, but they were not familiar with each other and Prince Zhongxian's people. Therefore, I suspect that the other party was most likely arranged by another party. Perhaps it was those people who were familiar with Prince Zhongxian. They all knew that the emperor was the most suspicious person. As long as they mentioned that Pang Xiao might be colluding with someone, and that someone might be secretly eyeing the throne, the emperor would certainly not pay attention to them. Sure enough, Li Chitian lowered his eyes and pondered. He was surprised and doubtful. In today's imperial court, who would wallow in the mire with Pang Xiao? Thinking about it this way, didn't those generals privately call Pang Xiao god of war Wang Yi? Their worship of Pang Xiao was almost to the point of blindness. It wasn't the first time that the imperial court had quarreled over matters related to Pang Xiao. How could he have overlooked it? If these people were secretly colluding with Pang Xiao, it would be fine. But what if they were bewitched by Pang Xiao and joined forces to make a scene? Now that the external and internal troubles had just been resolved, if Pang Xiao got the help of these people, wouldn't he take the opportunity to do something big? Li Qitian's heart was in his mouth. What about the people of the Pang family now? Replying to your majesty, they have been sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison according to your previous instructions. Think about it carefully. Are there any characteristics of the people you mentioned just now? Everyone's hearts were in their throats again. They had said these things to attract Li Qitian's attention, so that he would not pay attention to the uproar caused by their return to the capital. Who would have thought that they would find another trouble for themselves? The spies were afraid that if they couldn't answer, they would be punished by the emperor. They immediately racked their brains to recall the situation at that time. As a result, they were reminded of something. Oh, right. Your Majesty, those people are wearing the clothes of Da Ju's commoners, but they seem to be wearing Taitan leather boots. After being reminded, a few people who had fought with that group of people that day remembered some details. They nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, Your Majesty, those people were indeed wearing Tartar's cowhide boots." That kind of cowhide is not something that Da Ju can have, but it is a specialty of the Taitan grassland. They must be Tartars who have sneaked in. Li Qitian's eyes darkened, and he said word by word, "Chu, chu, chu?" Yes. Everyone lowered their heads and answered in a deep voice. Li Qitian paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. After a moment, he laughed mockingly. How interesting. I thought that Prince Zhongshiren was something, wholeheartedly fighting against the Tartars, even going against the imperial edict. I didn't expect him to be so sanctimonious. On the surface, he is a hero fighting against the Tartars, but he is secretly colluding with the Tartans. Everyone was a little flustered when they heard this, because they knew the consequences of Li Qitian causing such a misunderstanding. However, that group of people were indeed wearing Taitan cowhide boots. This was an indisputable fact. Although the spies were loyal to Li Qitian, they admired Pang Xiao very much. If they said that Pang Xiao was colluding with the Taitan, wouldn't their country be destroyed? Come. Send an imperial edict to summon Prince Zhongshiren back to the capital to report on his work. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone saluted in unison. The spies heaved a sigh of relief. Just as they were about to leave, Li Qitian said, "In addition, keep an eye on the Qin clan. Bring out Pang Zhish's child alone. I will personally go back and ask what kind of secret deal they made with the Taitan." Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone saluted again. Percent in the dead of winter, the dungeon was even gloomier than usual. The air was filled with a rotten and moldy smell. At the end of the corridor, there was a small bucket window that didn't let in much light. The thick wooden bars separated Qin Yining from the rest of the people. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and Ziyuan were locked together with the wet nurse and the children. The imperial bodyguards were trapped like dumplings and locked in the position furthest away from them. They could only vaguely see their figures. The wet nurse hugged brother Xian and sister Yun and gently coaxed them. It wasn't easy for her to coax the children to sleep. Qin Yining leaned weakly against the wall. His hands were tied behind his back. His long hair was messy, his cheeks were dirty, and the corners of his lips were stained with blood. A pair of bright eyes watched the children fall asleep. Only then did he quietly sigh in relief, showing a bit of exhaustion. "Princess, how are you?" Bing Tang grabbed the wooden bars with both hands and stretched his neck to look in the direction of Qin Yining, who was one cell away. Qin Yining shook his head. With his back leaning against the moldy straw, he said weakly, I'm fine. You guys take good care of the children." Ji Yun and Bing Tang both nodded. The wet nurse also hugged the young master and young miss tightly in her arms. "Princess, don't worry. You saved the lives of this servant's entire family. Even if this servant has to sacrifice my life, I won't let anything happen to the young master and young miss." Qin Yining smiled bitterly. The corner of his lips was torn, and a trace of blood dripped down. "What did I do? Wang Yi and I went to the disaster relief area to do what we should do, but now we've implicated you. If I didn't choose you to be the wet nurse in the Fu, you wouldn't have become prisoners today. In the end, I've implicated you." "Princess, don't say that." "That's right, Princess. If we didn't come to the Fu to be the wet nurse that day, we wouldn't have been able to survive at home. Princess saved the lives of our family and gave us jobs. She gave us money to support the old and young at home. We can't thank Princess enough. Princess is kind and never mistreats the servants. We eat and dress well with Princess. There's no reason for us to be thick-skinned when we're enjoying life. Now that we've met with disaster, if we blame you for implicating us, then what kind of people would we be?" The other wet nurse was the most stupid, but she also nodded in agreement. These two women in their prime had been tortured by life. They looked like they were almost 40 years old, but the sincere smiles on their faces made them look even more gentle and beautiful. Qin Yining felt a lot more at ease. He smiled and said, "Being able to receive your help is my and Wang Yi's good fortune. If I can escape alive in the future, I'll thank you properly." Everyone shook their heads. "Princess, don't worry. You and Wang Yi will be fine." However, even though they said that, they still felt bad in their hearts. Because they had seen with their own eyes how the emperor treated the families of the meritorious officials. They also knew that after the Tartars were driven out, the emperor summoned Wang Yi back to the capital. When all these things were connected together, anyone with a bit of intelligence would be able to understand the cause and effect of all this. Wasn't it because the emperor was afraid of the meritorious officials? They didn't have much contact with Wang Yi, but ever since they followed Princess and took care of the young master and young miss, they had been taken care of by Princess. Such good women had been implicated because of this matter. The men were fighting outside, risking their lives to protect the country, but the women and children were thrown into prison with an uncertain future. What kind of irony was this? Qin Yining tiredly closed his eyes. He wanted to take advantage of this time to sleep. Just at this time, there was the sound of the door opening and the sound of metal chains sliding. Then, the iron door was pushed open with a creak, and a burst of disorderly footsteps came in, echoing in the long and gloomy corridor. A group of people quickly walked down the corridor towards the innermost side. Xie Yu and the others couldn't help but stand up. One by one, they looked inside. However, they were in prison and couldn't use their strength. They could only huddle together and stretch their necks to try and see in Qin Yining's direction. Under the lead of the jailer, the spy walked quickly to Qin Yining's cell and stood still. When the jailer opened the door of Qin Yining's cell, the spy waved his hand casually to the jailer. The jailer retreated a few steps and stood in the corner. Qin Yining narrowed his eyes and looked at the person in front of him through his hair. He recognized that this was the person who had made the decision to bring them back. Even the arrogant Jingji guards were respectful to this person. He must be Li Qitian's trusted aide. The other did not speak, so Qin Yining also did not speak. He quietly sat in his spot and waited. The secret agent laughed. "Everyone says that the Prince Zhongxian's consort comes from the Qin clan and is the daughter of the wise Pan An. She is the most beautiful woman in the capital. Today, it seems that it is true." His voice was not loud, but the prison of the Ministry of Justice was only so big, and the prison was quite spacious. The surrounding walls echoed quite a bit, and such frivolous words were immediately heard clearly by everyone. "Presumptuous. You cannot be rude to the Wang Fei. Dog thief, if you have the skills, come at us." Xie Yu and the others were furious. However, they were tightly bound and could not do anything. They could only anxiously shout with their eyes wide open. Qin Yining was very calm. He looked at the incomer in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. The secret agent laughed. "I have never seen a woman like you. You are clearly a weak woman, but you are full of stubbornness. Even the whips and beatings along the way were not able to subdue you." He pushed open the door and entered the cell. He squatted down in front of Qin Yining and lifted her messy long hair with one hand. He looked at her starry eyes and her face that was still delicate and beautiful even though it was dirty. His voice was slightly intoxicated. You were born with this kind of appearance. If you were willing to make good use of it, would you have suffered so much on the way here? His finger reached out towards the whip mark on Qin Yining's neck. Qin Yining tilted her head and dodged his hand. You came here by imperial decree? What orders does your majesty have? With one sentence, the secret agent's hand stopped in midair and slowly fell down. He shook his head and sneered, You really know how to be a party pooper. Yes, I came here by imperial decree. You shouldn't want to know your majesty's orders. Qin Yining pursed her pale lips. There was still no color on her lips. The trace of blood at the corner of her lips made her cheeks look extremely pale. The secret agent sighed and said, Your Majesty has ordered me to take away your 2 children. Children, if you are willing to agree to my request and let me get close to you, I will treat your 2 children well. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee that they will live to see your Majesty. As he spoke, he raised his hand again and moved closer to Qin Yining's face. Qin Yining's beautiful eyes widened and she gritted her teeth. She was meat on the chopping block. Since she was captured, she knew that Sister Yun and Brother Xian would definitely be taken away. If she became hostages, Li Qitian would definitely think that she was not as important as the 2 children. Chapter 1146. The children are still young. They're only 3 months old. They can't leave, but your Majesty gave the order. The spy's hand caressed Qin Yining's face back and forth. His eyes gradually became heated and his voice trembled with excitement. Your Majesty asked me to bring the 2 children into the palace. As you said, they're only 3 months old. It's freezing outside. I can't guarantee their safety on the road, Princess Consort. Qin Yining pursed her pale lips. After a moment, she said, If you do anything to them, you won't be able to answer to the Emperor, right? When the time comes, will the Emperor let you off? Do you know what the Emperor wants us to do? Our lives are in danger, but the Emperor wants to see our lives used on the edge of a knife. Is that so? The spy said, When you put it that way, it makes sense. Anyway, they're twins. It's enough to leave a boy behind. As for a girl, her body is naturally weaker. She can't withstand the wind and snow in the north. Qin Yining's pupils shrank. She was speechless. Ji Yun gritted her teeth and roared, You despicable person. The wet nurses hugged the 2 children even tighter. Their eyes were full of vigilance. Xie Yu, Jing Zhe, Master Zhong, and the others wanted to break out of the cage and fight the spy to the death. Everyone cursed, despicable person, taking advantage of other people's difficulties. What kind of man are you? Their angry curses echoed in the prison cell. But the spy had a smile on his face. He stared at Qin Yining's pretty face with burning eyes and played with her long hair. So, what do you think? Qin Yining closed her eyes. She didn't dare to take the risk. She knew that Li Qitian would use her children to threaten Pang Xiao. In a man's heart, children were naturally more important than his wife. But she couldn't be sure if the person in front of her would understand this logic and secretly kill her children. She really did not dare to gamble. She could not lose either Brother Xian or Sister Yun. All right, Qin Yining suddenly opened his eyes, and there seemed to be a cold glint in his eyes. But I don't want to be here. There are too many people here. The spy was overjoyed and laughed heartily. Good, good, good. No matter what, there needs to be a bed to be worthy of Wang Fei's noble status. With this, does it mean that Zhongshan Qinwang and I are colleagues? As he spoke, he lifted Qin Yining's collar and walked out with her in his arms. He ordered the jailer of the Ministry of Justice's prison, Go, make room for me. Hey! The jailer chuckled as he led the spy out of the room. Your Highness, Princess Consort, Ji Yun, Bing Tang, and the other womenfolk cried in despair. Xie Yu and the others' eyes were crimson red. Their angry roars echoed throughout the entire prison. But they were tied up and could not do anything. They had endured being whipped and insulted on the way here. But now, because of their lack of protection, Wang Fei was going to accompany such a despicable person. How could they endure it? How could they explain it to Wang Yi? This old one is ashamed to face Wang Yi, ashamed to face Wang Yi. Xie Yu's tears flowed down his old face as he sighed towards the sky. Liao Zhibing gritted his teeth and said, "We have to think of a way. Even if we have to atone for our crimes, we have to bring Wang Fei, the young master, and young miss out of here before we die." Right. Everyone agreed and racked their brains. At this time, the secret agent had already turned a corner with Qin Yining's shoulder and arrived at a single cell. This cell had an iron door and only a small window was opened at the bottom. It seemed like it was used to deliver food. The jailer took out a key and opened the door. He smiled and said, "Master Nai, this is the only single cell in our prison. Please make do with it. Although we can't block out the sound, at least those people can't see us." How could the secret agent care about anything else at this time? He could not wait any longer. He pushed open the door and pushed Qin Yining inside. There was a wooden bed in the narrow cell. The bed was covered in moldy straw. There was a large window in the wall that reflected the grey sky of a winter afternoon. A thin layer of snow floated down. Qin Yining was pressed onto the wooden bed by the secret agent. Her hands were tied behind her back. She twisted her body and her soft voice carried a bit of panting. You have to let go of my hands first. This is too uncomfortable." The secret agent was already kissing her neck. He gave a rough and cold laugh. "Don't even think about it. It's fine as long as your legs aren't tied up. I don't trust you." Then, the sound of silk ripping could be heard in the cell. The walls of this gloomy prison were damp and were not soundproof at all. Everything could be heard clearly. Everyone wanted to speak to block out the sound, but they didn't know what to say. Bing Tang's eyes were swollen like walnuts from crying. She covered her mouth and sobbed, muttering, "What to do? This is a dead end. This is a dead end." With Wang Yi and Wang Fei's relationship, after this, could Wang Fei still live? The wet nurse was sobbing as she hugged her child. She was both sad and moved. A mother was strong, a mother was strong. Even if she could not throw away her bottom line, she could throw it away for her child. Just as everyone was at a loss and in despair, a man's scream came from the distance. Then, it was followed by disorderly curses that were unbearable to the ear. Let go, you. Let." The jailer had been eavesdropping outside. Hearing that something was wrong, he quickly charged in. When he pulled open the metal door, he saw the woman with her hands tied behind her straddling the half-clothed man. She was like a wild wolf as she viciously bit the man's neck. The man's carotid artery was torn by her sharp canine teeth and blood flowed out. The woman's face and body were covered in blood, but she still tightly bit his neck and did not let go. The spy pushed her with his hands and punched her head. Qin Yining endured it and refused to let go. She could kill her today. If she died, she could let the world know how the emperor treated the family of a meritorious official. At that time, her children and the people around her might still have a chance to be saved. But if she couldn't kill her, she would take this slut's life. How could she allow someone who might harm her children to live in this world? Since he could think of such a crooked method for the emperor, Li Qitian, birds of a feather flock together. She couldn't see that this person was bad, so she would help Li Qitian clean up the family. The smell of blood filled her nose. Qin Yining didn't know how much blood she had swallowed. Even her hair was soaked in blood. The spy could only scream miserably. The jailer hurriedly came forward to pull Qin Yining away, but the scene was too frightening. Even a man like him was scared stiff by the bloody scene, but this woman still refused to let go. In the end, he pulled her hair and pulled her away, only to see that the woman was still holding a piece of flesh in her mouth. Her head and face were covered in blood, and only the whites of her eyes were particularly bright under the dim light. She looked at him with an evil smile, and spat out the piece of flesh with a pay sound. At this time, the spy's whole body was convulsing and he was holding his neck. Blood was spurting out from between his fingers. He was like a stranded fish, widening his eyes and opening his mouth, but to no avail. "Go! Tell your emperor." Qin Yining's hands were still tied. She jumped to the ground with her long legs. The jailer was scared by her bright eyes that were covered in blood and that she was so bloody that he took a step back. Tell him that the people he sent didn't listen to orders and wanted to kill important hostages. I've already killed them. Her voice, which had always been low and gentle, seemed to have become more metallic after being nourished by human blood. It echoed in the silent prison cell. Tell your emperor again. If he wants to negotiate, then negotiate. If he wants to use us as hostages, we're willing to cooperate. My 2 children and I can only die together. If he wants to kill any one of us, I'll make him waste his efforts. He won't even need a single hostage. Her resolute tone was full of the will to die. At worst, she would fight to the death. If she and her children weren't there to hold them back, Pang Xiao wouldn't be so timid. If news of their deaths spread, with Pang Xiao's usually affectionate personality, he might not even fight with the Taitan and Shui Jun would directly come back to the capital. This was definitely not what Li Chitian wanted to see. Li Chitian would definitely think of a way to make the most of them as hostages. The spy's legs bounced a few times. His eyes were wide open as he clutched his collar tightly and stopped moving. In the prison cell filled with blood and the smell of blood, the jailer came back to his senses in a daze. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and nodded frantically. Qin Yining walked out of the door. The jailer was so scared that he took a step back. He hesitated for a moment before he dared to step forward and follow her to the cell where she was originally locked up. Xie Yu, Bing Tang, and the others had already heard the noise. They all stretched their necks to look outside. When they saw Qin Yining covered in blood, they gasped. They also saw that her clothes were slightly open at the collar and nothing else was wrong. They secretly sighed in relief. Wang Fei. Bing Tang choked with sobs. Qin Yining passed by their cell and smiled comfortingly. However, the smile of a person whose face was covered in blood only gave off an eerie and terrifying feeling. It didn't have any comforting effect at all. Don't worry. I've bitten that bitch to death. Bitten to death. Yes. The jailer pushed Qin Yining into the cell door. His hands quickly locked the cell door as if he was afraid of a ferocious beast running out to bite people. Then, he quickly ran out and called for his colleagues in the cell next door to help. He even shouted loudly, "Not good. Not good. Wang Fei has bitten Master nigh to death." Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and the others were all squeezed to Qin Yining's side. They looked at Qin Yining across the cell. "Wang Fei, how are you?" Qin Yining smiled. She sat tiredly on the moldy straw. Only then did she feel her vision turn black. Her entire body hurt, especially her head. She felt dizzy just by moving. It must be because the person called Master nigh hit her too hard when he resisted. "I'm fine. I won't die." Qin Yining closed her eyes and leaned her head against the cold wall. She muttered, "After this mess, I want to see who dares to have any evil thoughts." Li Chitian wants a live hostage to threaten Pang Zhishi to return to the capital. If Pang Zhishi knows about our deaths, she won't just return to the capital to report on her work. Instead, she will bring her soldiers and horses to fight back. Isn't Li Chitian afraid of soldiers who have just killed the Tartars and seen blood? Hair. Although she said it with a firm tone, her battered appearance, which was covered in blood, didn't seem to be the case at all. A girl almost lost her virginity. She personally bit down on someone's throat and was sprayed with warm blood all over her body. How desperate must she be to do this? Chapter 1147. I hope he doesn't come back. Qin Yining closed her eyes tiredly and curled up even tighter. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and the others all hung their heads. Their tear-stained faces were filled with despair. Of course, they knew that the emperor had set up an inescapable net. As long as Wang Yi stepped into Jing, only death awaited him. Wang Fei was extremely intelligent. She had probably predicted this day would come when she had been captured. However, they had been looking for a chance the entire time but had not been able to find a way to escape. If there was hope, who wouldn't want to live well? Wang Fei and Wang Yi had such a good relationship. Why wouldn't they want to be together forever and grow old together? However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. It was not up to them. The icy air spread through the deathly silent prison. After the anger, everyone was only left with confusion. They were now in prison and had no way out. They really didn't know what new tricks Li Chitian would play. Wang Fei had killed the person sent by Li Chitian. What kind of tense situation would she face next? Qin Yining closed her eyes and wanted to rest. She didn't know what would happen later. However, when she calmed down, there was a splash of red in front of her eyes. The man surnamed Nai widened his eyes in disbelief as he held his neck. She felt very cold and dizzy. Her entire body was in pain. She hugged herself even tighter. At this time, Li Chitian had received the news from the Ministry of Justice's prison. He was extremely shocked. You are saying that Prince Zhongxian's consort bit Nai to death? Yes. Nai threatened Wang Fei to have Wang Fei accompany him once. Wang Fei pretended to agree and found a chance to bite Nai's neck. The blood vessel there was broken. Li Chitian waved his hand in disbelief. He was angry that Nai had taken advantage of his work to do such a thing. However, he was even more shocked by Qin Yining's reaction. Isn't this woman a little too bold? She dared to bite someone to death. Was she still a woman? Most likely, normal men would not do such a thing. People said that the Qin clan grew up in the mountains before the age of 14. It seemed that this was true. However, when he thought about how Qin Yining was Pang Xiao's wife and how this woman was different from any other woman he knew, he felt even more jealous. Pang Zhishi was better than him in everything. The common people favored him. Pang Zhishi's wife was prettier than his. She was more than him. Li Chitian took a deep breath and suddenly stood up. All right. Very good. Her man is arrogant, and she doesn't put me in her eyes. I want to see for myself just how capable she is. She can only live if I let her live. If I want her to die, she has to die. Prepare. Everyone in the room agreed in unison. Xiong Jinshui was a bit worried. Your Majesty. It's cold outside. You. Get out of my way. Li Chitian strode out and kicked Xiong Jinshui to the side. The other eunuchs hurriedly followed. Some of them prepared carriages, horses, and cloaks. They were so busy that they fell off their horses. Xiong Jinshui endured the pain and got up. He scrambled to follow them. The prison cell in the Ministry of Justice's prison had just been cleaned up. Nai's body had also been carried out. Less than half an hour after it was locked up, there was a commotion outside the door. Your Majesty. The jailer was at a loss. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed several times. The emperor had come in person. The Minister of Justice, Assistant Minister, and other officials did not have time to rush over. However, the jailers suffered. They were so scared that their bones turned to jelly. They almost stuttered when they spoke. Nai was bitten to death. Yes, yes. Second Master Nai's neck was bitten. He died from blood loss. Li Chitian received confirmation. He sneered. Where is the Prince Zhongxian's consort? In the prison. The jailer hurriedly got up and went to open the door. The eunuchs who followed Li Chitian felt that it was not appropriate for Emperor Fang to set foot in this place. However, Li Chitian did not care. He strode down the stairs and followed the jailer. The eunuchs and guards had no choice but to follow. Although it was snowing outside, it was warmer than inside the prison cell. As soon as they entered the prison, they were greeted by a cold, musty, and bloody smell. Li Chitian had lived like a prince for many years. He could not endure much hardship. He covered his mouth with his sleeve in disgust. Lead the way. Yes, yes. Several jailers carried lanterns and walked all the way to Qin Yining's prison cell. Li Chitian also disliked the filth in the prison cell. He was too lazy to look around. When he passed by Xie Yu and the others' cells, he did not even look at them. When he arrived at Bing Tang and the wet nurse's cell, he waved his hand to Xiong Jinshui behind him. Go, bring the two children out. Xiong Jinshui nodded and hurriedly called a few people to bring the two children over. The wet nurse, Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and the others all wanted to resist. Qin Yining had already stood up. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were shining as he looked over. Li Chitian looked back and saw Qin Yining covered in blood in the dark environment. She looked like a red person. He was scared by her fierce expression. Then he laughed. "TSK, isn't this the Prince Zhongxian's consort? How did you end up like this? I didn't know that a woman could be so vicious. How can you bite someone to death? Did Pang Zhishi give this to you?" The blood on Qin Yining's head and face had already dried up. Her long hair had become strands, and the blood on her face had also turned dark brown, making the whites of her eyes look exceptionally white. She really exuded a strange aura. "Your Majesty, the children are innocent. You are a benevolent ruler. You won't do anything to the children of meritorious officials, right?" Li Chitian sneered. "The children of meritorious officials? May I ask who is the meritorious official? Is Pang Xiao's crime of disobeying the imperial edict not counted? Pang Xiao used his own money to provide disaster relief, pay for the prince, and expel the Tartars from Daju's disciple. Is this not counted? Whether it counts or not, it is up to me to decide. It is not up to a vicious woman like you to decide." Li Chitian walked to the door of Qin Yining's prison and grabbed the wooden fence. He gritted his teeth and said, "I am the son of heaven, the master of this world. Why should he take all the benefits? Benefits? Risking our lives on the battlefield, risking our lives, not having enough to eat, not having enough to wear, not having enough food to eat, and not having enough to wear, not having enough food and pay, we still have to fight the Tartars." Qin Yining also threw caution to the wind at this time. He strode forward and looked at Li Chitian through the prison door. His words were particularly sonorous and forceful. "For your country, for the sake of the people's stable lives, your subjects shed their blood outside, and did their duty without asking for anything in return. But what did you do? Your Majesty is not afraid of being ridiculed by the world if this matter is spread out. How will it be recorded in the history books?" Li Chitian clenched his hands into fists and stared at Qin Yining's blood-stained face. He gritted his teeth and said, "I am the son of heaven, and the son of heaven is the master of this world. Whoever I want to live can live. If I want someone to die, that person must die. Ridicule? Whoever dares to ridicule, I will send them to see the king of hell. It doesn't matter who the prince is, who pays the silver. All the lands in this world belong to the king. Is their silver not my silver? Only a vicious woman like you can speak fast here. Fatuous ruler." Qin Yining gritted his teeth and couldn't help but curse. Li Chitian's anger dissipated. "Guards, Prince Zhongxian's consort has been disrespectful. Lock her up in a prison cart and parade her through the street. Tell everyone in the city that the blood on her body was spilled because she bit someone to death." "Yes." Without waiting for the jailer to step forward, the imperial bodyguards and eunuchs took the key and opened the prison door. They entered the prison and dragged Qin Yining out. Qin Yining's body was covered with whip and rod wounds. His hands and feet were frostbitten. Just now, he had been hit on the head while he was struggling. At this time, he was so weak that he wished he could fall to the ground and never get up again. Li Chitian's imperial bodyguards didn't show any mercy. Qin Yining was dragged out of the prison with staggering steps. "Princess! Princess!" The crowd lamented. However, Li Chitian seemed to like hearing such cries. It was as if he saw Pang Xiao's people in such a sorry state, as if he saw Pang Xiao also in such a sorry state. The more miserable these people cried, the more comfortable he felt. Li Chitian couldn't help but laugh to the sky. The swaddling clothes in the arms of Xiong Jinshui and the eunuchs moved a little. Brother Xian and sister Yun finally cried out in fear. In the midst of the chaos, the loud cries of the babies were particularly penetrating. The entire prison became quiet because of this. Xie Yu and the others' hearts skipped a beat. They stared at Li Chitian's direction without blinking. They were so nervous that they trembled. Right now, it was not the time for them to think of a solution. They were tied up and tightly locked up. Even if they wanted to rush out, they couldn't. Moreover, the young master and young miss were in Li Chitian's hands. As long as he said the word, these two children would die. They wanted to plead for mercy, but they also knew that it was useless. Li Chitian was simply inhumane. He didn't care whether he killed an ignorant child or not. He only wanted to feel good. With his hands behind his back, Li Chitian walked in front of Xiong Jinshui. He untied the swaddling clothes and looked at the baby wearing a tiger head hat. Then, he looked at the other child. For a moment, he clenched his fists. It was as if his patience had reached its limit. He wanted to strangle the child to death on the spot. His hand slowly stroked Brother Xian's weak and soft neck. He gradually exerted force. The crowd couldn't bear it any longer. Jingzhe was just about to curse when Xie Yu pulled him back. Xie Yu said loudly, Your Majesty, please reconsider. That's just a child. A child is innocent. Moreover, this child is more useful alive. Li Chitian didn't think that the child was innocent. Who told him to be unlucky and reincarnate as Pang Xiao's child? However, the last sentence successfully woke him up. He still wanted to use these two children as bait to lure Pang Xiao back to the capital. If he directly killed them, wouldn't he be forcing Pang Xiao to rebel? Right now, it was better to coax Pang Xiao back and make a long-term plan. Thinking of this, Li Chitian raised his hand, turned around, and walked out. Xiong Jinshui and the others immediately followed. Chapter 1148. Qin Yining was pushed out of the prison. Imperial bodyguards, palace servants, and officials from the Ministry of Justice were standing in front of the door. When they saw a woman covered in blood appear in front of them, they couldn't help but be shocked. Seeing that the eunuchs were preparing a prisoner carriage, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice and his superior looked at each other and went forward to ask about the situation in a low voice. The jailer said in a low voice, Your Majesty ordered that the princess be paraded through the streets. After saying that, he bowed his head and retreated. Not long after, a prisoner carriage was pushed over and someone went to lead the horse. Qin Yining was pushed into the prisoner carriage. The carriage was neither too high nor too low, so her head and hands were stuck on it. She couldn't stand up straight or squat down, so she could only squat. It was torturous. The Minister of Justice frowned. It had been many years since he had seen a serious criminal paraded through the streets like this. This Qin Yining was Prince Zhongxian's wife. What kind of unforgivable evil thing could she have done to make the emperor so angry? Li Chitian strode out with the divine empress followed by the eunuchs and guards. Two eunuchs were holding swaddling clothes in their arms. The babies in the swaddling clothes were still crying themselves hoarse. Qin Yining was locked in the prison wagon. She had been drowsy, but when she heard the children's cries, she immediately woke up. She turned around abruptly, and her tears fell down, washing the blood on her face and leaving 2 white traces. Children, my children. Your Majesty, that is the son of a meritorious minister. Pang Xiao fought for you outside, but you took his wife and children. Your Majesty, aren't you afraid that the world will be bitterly disappointed? Li Chitian sneered. Xiong Jinshui immediately understood the emperor's intention. He stood up and reprimanded, Why aren't you taking her out? Your Majesty is wise and benevolent. He was a wise ruler at that time. How can you slander him as you wish? Li Chitian looked at Qin Yining's appearance and remembered how powerful this woman was. Perhaps she could even bewitch the people on the streets. Gag her mouth for Zhen. Let's see how she can mislead the people with her lies. Yes. Immediately, someone tore off a piece of cloth, climbed onto the prison wagon and stuffed it into Qin Yining's mouth. Then, they tied a knot behind her head to prevent her from pulling it off. Qin Yining shook his head and could only make sobbing noises. The bloodstains were truly frightening. Li Chitian waved his hand, and the jailer immediately drove the prisoner's carriage out. Li Chitian also arranged for the Gongji guards to line up beside the prisoner's carriage to guard it in case someone tried to kidnap the prisoners. In the silence, only the squeaking of wooden wheels on the snow and the whimpering of Qin Yining in the prison wagon could be heard. After the group of people left, Li Chitian said, Let's go back to the palace. Your Majesty. The Minister of Justice strode forward and bowed. Your Majesty, this princess consort did not do anything wrong. It is too unreasonable to punish her like this. I ask your Majesty to take back the order. Unreasonable? She just brutally killed someone. Didn't you see the bloodstains on her body? But Prince Zhengxian's princess consort is of noble birth, and she is also a woman. Moreover, she is being detained by so many people. This official believes that there must be a secret behind the murder. Li Qitian narrowed his eyes and looked at the Minister of Justice. Su Huayu, I see that your job is getting better and better. You dare to question Zhen's order? Su Huayu was startled. He suppressed the panic in his heart and bowed his head. This official misspoke. Your Majesty, please forgive this offense. Li Qitian coldly snorted and ordered, let's go back to the palace. Xiong Jinshui immediately shouted, Your Majesty, let's go back to the palace. Everyone bowed and respectfully sent him off. After watching the emperor leave, Su Huayu couldn't help but look worriedly at the tracks left by the prison wagon. At other times, the emperor was happy to be a benevolent ruler. However, when it came to matters related to Prince Zhengshuren, he would become so radical and unreasonable. This was not a good sign. The people in the world were not blind or stupid. There were many people who were sensitive and liked to analyze the politics of the imperial court. If this was made public at this time and it was spread by people with ulterior motives, would the emperor's reputation still be intact? The emperor couldn't understand such a simple reason at this time. Or maybe the emperor understood everything, but he didn't care. Qin Yining was very familiar with the streets of the capital. When she was free, she would take her servant girls to walk around. However, in the cold weather, when the snow was falling, it was the first time for Qin Yining to walk through the streets of the capital in a half-squatting, half-standing position in the prison wagon covered with blood, and the cotton wool on her jacket fell out from the whip. Every time the prison wagon passed a street, the jailer would announce Qin Yining's crime in a clear voice. He only said that she was as vicious as a hungry wolf and used her teeth to bite an official of the court to death. He didn't mention whether the person to die was an official or not, or why she was bitten. He didn't mention the cause and effect. There were Jingji guards around the prison wagon watching, looking for suspicious people in the crowd. When the common people saw that there were people watching, they didn't dare to talk loudly. They only dared to raise their doubts in low voices. Prince Zhengshuren's character is trustworthy. Why is his Wang Fei like this? You don't know, but when Prince Zhengshuren was in disaster relief, Wang Fei helped him a lot. Later on, when Wang Yi was fighting the Tartars on the front lines, Wang Fei was the one who helped with the food. You're just bragging. Ha, don't doubt it. Our family has relatives in Jingang. Previously, Wang Fei was temporarily living in Jingang. She hasn't given birth to a pair of twins with Wang Yi yet. On one hand, she has to give birth, and on the other, she's busy with military pay. How can such a woman kill people for no reason? Maybe there's a secret. Don't talk nonsense. Wang Fei was dragged out to parade through the streets. That was decided by the officials above. Do you not want your heads anymore? Do you want to go to the Yamen and be beaten? There were all kinds of discussions and guesses among the common people. There were people who believed that Qin Yining would kill people, but no one believed that she would torture and kill someone for no reason. It didn't matter if the Jingji guards believed it or not. They could only act according to the edict. Your Majesty told them to observe if anyone in the crowd had any thoughts of rebellion, so they observed carefully. They didn't dare to think about anything else. A wild wind blew past, and snowflakes fell down like goose feathers. Originally, it had only been xiao shui, but now it was bone-chilling. The snowflakes were like blades cutting across her face. It was so cold that it hurt. Qin Yining closed her eyes and shrunk her neck involuntarily due to the cold. Her chin immediately touched the cold wooden board of the prison wagon. She laughed self-mockingly, moved her cold and stiff legs, and continued to close her eyes, refusing to see or hear. The snow fluttered in the wind, blocking everyone's vision. Most of the common people had scattered. Only a few people curiously followed the prison carriage, wanting to find out what had happened. Tang Xiu led 10 Jinghu Wei to hide in the crowd. Her eyes were about to crack. Let's charge up and save Wang Fei. Wang Fei is such a noble person. How can she suffer like this? If Wang Yi knew, he would die of heartache. That muddle-headed ruler. He can't get our Wang Yi, so he's venting his anger on Wang Fei. How can he be considered a man? Charge up and save Wang Fei. The Jinghu Wei were all agitated. They wanted to immediately charge up. Tang Xiu calmly shook her head. No, we can't act rashly. If we are caught, we will implicate Wang Yi. We have to listen to Wang Yi's orders. They didn't expect that even though they rushed over, they were still a step too late. The road from the border to the capital was blocked by snow. It was fine if it was a sunny day, but because of the snowstorm, they couldn't tell the direction. That was why they were late. They didn't expect to see this scene when they arrived in the capital. They never expected that Li Qitian would be so despicable as to use a woman as a ploy. Let's ask Wang Yi first. When he needs us, we brothers shouldn't be afraid. Tang Xiu gritted her teeth. We brothers have never been afraid of anyone. Everyone was riled up. They immediately thought of a way to send a letter to Pang Xiao. As for Li Qitian, he couldn't help but feel disappointed when he learned that Qin Yining hadn't found any suspicious people when she was parading through the streets. It seems that we still have to wait a while. Li Qitian clicked his tongue twice. If this woman doesn't work, we can only use other methods. Xiong Jinshui stood to the side with his head bowed. When he heard this, he buried his face even lower. The news that Prince Zhongxian's consort had tortured and killed an official, and that Your Majesty had ordered people to parade her through the streets quickly spread throughout the city. After Qin Yining was paraded through the streets, she was sent back to the Ministry of Justice's prison. When Li Qitian remembered her, he would have people put her in a prison carriage and take her around the city. Whether or not she was paraded through the streets depended on the emperor's mood. Even when the new year was coming, he still didn't let her go. When Pang Xiao received the news, it was the 29th of the 12th lunar month. When he read the secret letter sent by Jinghu Wei, his hands trembled so much that he almost couldn't hold the thin piece of paper. Ji Ziyu grabbed Pang Xiao's shoulders and shook him heavily. Calm down. He's trying to lure you back. The imperial edict didn't summon you, so he's using such a despicable method. Pang Xiao's Adam's apple bobbed. After a long time, he nodded and said in a hoarse voice, Yes. I know. When Ji Ziyu saw him lower his head, there seemed to be a bright reflection in his phoenix-like eyes. He couldn't help but frown. Don't do this. This is a critical moment in the confrontation between the Taitan and us. Once we relax, it's very likely that we'll be killed. If we succeed, we can at least drive the Taitan back to their desert, so that they won't be able to invade our borders for hundreds of years. You know what's more important. I understand. Pang Xiao gritted his teeth. But I can't watch Sister Yi suffer like this. And my children, they were taken away by the emperor. I don't know if they're dead or alive. Just by reading this news, Pang Xiao felt like his heart was being twisted by a knife. How scared was his sister Yi? She was a kind-hearted woman. Why would she use such an extreme method to bite someone to death? If she wasn't forced to a dead end, why would she do this? I have to go back and save her. Pang Xiao pursed his lips and paced back and forth. Ji Ziyu pursed his lips. His gloominess was written all over his face. He helplessly put his hands on his hips and looked at Pang Xiao pacing back and forth like a headless fly. Pang Xiao couldn't figure out what to do, so he called Xu Weiji and the other strategists over to discuss this matter. Qin Yining had just finished another afternoon of parading through the streets. Her legs were so sore that they were beyond recognition. She was directly dragged back to the prison by the jailers. As soon as she was pushed into the prison cell, a jailer came over with a wooden basin. Before Qin Yining could react, the jailer splashed the water over her head. Hurry up and wash away the stench on her body. I can't stand the stench. In the dead of winter, people could freeze to death in the prison. Qin Yining screamed when a basin of cold water was poured on her head. The cold water flowed down her hair and face, and the blood that had already hardened and turned black flowed down her face and hair. Before she could catch her breath, Another basin of cold water was poured over her. Chapter 1149. Princess Consort. Damn it. You can't be so rude to the princess consort. In the prison cell, everyone was shouting angrily. They had watched Qin Yining being abused these past few days, but they had been locked up and could only watch helplessly. Their Wang Fei was a resolute person and had never once complained about it. But they had seen everything that the princess consort had endured. Not to mention that she was just a weak woman. Even a man might not be able to endure being locked up in a prison carriage and paraded through the streets in this cold winter. They had been locked up in the prison all day. Even when they were squeezed together, they were still shivering from the cold. The princess consort had been locked up in a cell by herself. Her fox fur coat had already been taken away and she had nothing to warm herself with. Now that she had just come back from parading through the snow, she was directly splashed with cold water. Your Majesty hasn't said what he wants the princess consort to do, but you're doing this. Aren't you afraid that something will happen to the princess consort and you won't be able to explain yourself? Xie Yu's voice was hoarse from shouting. The jailer laughed loudly. Don't say that. We have good intentions. The princess consort has a noble status and a noble personality. Naturally, she can't stand dirt. You must be feeling terrible being covered in blood these past few days, right? Isn't it better to be clean like this? Qin Yining had already become numb from the cold. Just as she touched the water on her face, another basin of cold water was splashed at her. The blood had been washed away, but her clothes were soaked and stuck tightly to her body. Qin Yining couldn't catch her breath. After resting for a while, she struggled to move to the wall. Leaning against the wall, she didn't have any strength left. She closed her eyes and her long, fan-like eyelashes dripped with water as if she was crying. Qin Yining's ears were ringing. She knew that Xie Yu, Ji Yun, and the others were arguing with the jailer again, but she didn't have time to care about anything else at this time. Right now, every day was torture, but she had to grit her teeth and endure. Thinking that she still had to parade through the streets tomorrow, Qin Yining's heart was filled with fear. It was too cold outside. As a native southerner, she was not used to the harsh winter in the north. Moreover, she did not have any cotton-padded clothes to wear. Her hands and feet were already frostbitten, and the scars from the whipping and the bruises from the stick were all inflamed. She had also been splashed with 3 basins of cold water. At this moment, Qin Yining gritted her teeth and endured the torture. She felt so uncomfortable that she wanted to cry. However, she still gritted her teeth and endured it. Even though her body was trembling like a leaf being blown off by a strong wind, she still held on with her willpower. Because she wasn't sure how the children were doing. Most of the time, Qin Yining was telling herself that she had to persevere, that she had to stop. Only by staying alive would she have a chance to save her child. But now, Qin Yining was trembling all over and his eyes were closed. She was starting to doubt whether she had made the right choice. No matter what Li Qitian wanted to do to her children, there was nothing she could do. She knew that her body wouldn't be able to withstand the torture for long. Perhaps before Pang Xiao's people came to rescue her, she would have already collapsed. She couldn't do anything right now. Even if she lived, she would become a bargaining chip that Li Qitian could use to threaten Pang Xiao. Then why did she continue to persevere? The jailer stood outside the cage. After admiring Qin Yining's miserable state enough, he hummed a tune and walked out with the empty basin. When he arrived outside the prison, he put down the empty basin. The jailer had just picked up the lantern when he saw 2 people walking towards him. The old woman in front was the one who had given him money a few days ago and asked him to take good care of the princess consort. The woman behind her was wearing an embroidered cloak made of sable fur. Her head and face were covered, so he couldn't see clearly. The jailer hurriedly bowed. The old woman in front said, "How is it? How is the princess consort of the Prince Zhongshiren today? In response to your question, everything has been arranged according to your instructions. I just cleaned the princess consort up. She's trembling inside right now. The old woman nodded in satisfaction and turned to look at the luxuriously dressed woman. The jailer tilted his head in confusion. The woman said, "Open the door, I want to go in and take a look." The jailer hurriedly smiled apologetically and explained, "You're making things difficult for this lowly one. Your Majesty's decree says that no one can visit at will. Stop talking nonsense." The woman lifted her hood and sneered, "Seeing this, princess, you still won't move aside." The jailer looked at the woman in front of him with a confused expression. The old woman reprimanded, "This is Enyang, elder princess. How can people like you see her? Why aren't you kneeling down and saluting? Enyang, elder princess, the only sister of the emperor. Her husband was the Duke of Dingwa. Her background was too big." The jailer knelt down with a plop. He called his brothers who were still talking and laughing when they came out and saluted Li Helan together. Li Helan looked at the people in front of her with disdain. "This princess wants to go in and take a look, is that not allowed?" This. Replying to Princess Royal, Prince Zhengxuan's consort is a wanted criminal. Your Majesty didn't give any orders. According to reason, you can't visit her. Presumptuous. Could it be that you're all blind? With this princess here, you dare to stop me? Li Helan kicked the jailer's shoulder, making him sit on the ground. The jailer didn't think that the Princess Royal would be such a domineering person. He gave a bitter smile. Thinking about what kind of people were locked up here, they would die sooner or later. The Princess Royal was the only sister of the emperor and the wife of the Duke of Dingwa. It wasn't worth it for them to offend such a noble person. Moreover, as long as the human trafficker didn't go missing, it was fine. Thinking of this, the jailers respectfully asked the Princess Royal to go in for a visit. "Please, it's dark inside. This little one will prepare more lanterns for you." Li Helan was satisfied. With the help of Mama Tong, she entered the prison under the dim light. As soon as she entered, a moldy and unpleasant smell hit her in the face, making Li Helan frown. "What is this smell? Watch your step. Hey, the air in this prison is naturally not good, especially those prisoners. Their bodies are all very dirty." Li Helan used her sleeve to cover her nose and mouth. Her brows were knit together as she walked in, not forgetting to look around. Xie Yu and the others had already heard the commotion and were nervously looking at the people walking outside. Jing Zhe and the others had followed Qin Yining for a long time, so they naturally recognized Li Helan. "It's the Princess Royal of Enyang." Jing Zhe whispered into Xie Yu and the others' ears. Xie Yu's brows jumped and she nervously stood up again. He had followed Pang Xiao for a long time, so he naturally knew the Princess Royal's feelings towards Pang Xiao. He also knew that the Princess Royal hated the Princess Royal. At this time, he didn't believe that the Princess Royal wasn't here to add insult to injury. Xie Yu understood, but Ji Yun and Bing Tang understood even more. They nervously stood up and stared at the cell across from them. "Princess Royal, it's here." The jailers brought them to the door of Qin Yining's cell, saluted and left. Li Helan looked at the curled-up figure in the cell in confusion. Looking at her dirty and wet appearance, where was her previous brilliance? Li Helan suddenly began to laugh. "Ha, ha. This really is too funny. Qin Yining, even you have a day like this. You deserve it. You deserve it." Li Helan laughed in a carefree manner as she slapped her thigh. It was like she hadn't encountered such a good thing in a long time. She was laughing so hard that she couldn't control herself. Bing Tang clenched her fists as tears filled her eyes. Ji Yun really wanted to kill Li Helan. Li Helan's sharp laughter echoed in the cell, waking Qin Yining from her half-unconscious state. She felt her flesh and blood stiffen as she raised her head with difficulty. She could even hear the sound of her bones cracking. "It's you." Her low and gentle voice was hoarse, like it had been rubbed against by sandpaper. Li Helan laughed until she was out of breath. "How about it? I'm the most considerate towards you, right? I know that you like to be clean, so I specially ordered someone to give you a cold bath. Otherwise, wouldn't you be smelly? Zi, I never would have thought that you would have some skills. You can even use your teeth to bite someone to death. Do you know what others say about you? Li Helan grabbed the bars of the cell door and leaned against the cell, saying, "You are a savage, a vicious woman with a vicious heart. How could a person like you be worthy of Big Brother Xiao?" Qin Yining did not have the strength to argue with Li Helan. She knew that she was in dire straits, so it wasn't strange that Li Helan was in a rush to see her. She didn't resist and just let her taunt her. "Do you admit it? Qin Yining, look at what you look like now. You're just like a stray dog. You're a vicious woman, you jinx your parents, jinx your husband, jinx your children. There isn't anyone by your side that hasn't been jinxed by you. You should have died a long time ago. You're not worthy of Big Brother Xiao at all." Qin Yining was so tired that she couldn't even raise her eyes. She didn't want to pay attention to her, but Li Helan mentioned Pang Xiao again. Her heart was suddenly filled with flames that made her suddenly open her eyes. "I'm not worthy, but you're worthy." Qin Yining stood up with difficulty and her body swayed a few times. Ji Yun and the others all cried out in shock when they saw this. "You are the eldest princess of the dynasty and your husband is the Dingguo Duke, but you're still thinking about someone else's husband. With your personality, are you worthy of being the eldest princess? Quickly go back to your eldest princess palace and don't come out to make a fool of yourself. You're so audacious. Vicious slut, you little slut." Li Helan pointed at Qin Yining and began cursing. Qin Yining once again felt that it wasn't interesting. She shook her head and said, "In the end, it's just Pang Zhishi looking down on you, so you have a knot in your heart. If you have the skills, then go to the battlefield yourself and find your husband to divorce you. Then you can have your royal brother uphold justice for you and have Pang Zhishi marry you. What's the use of shouting at me here? Pay, bullshit." Li Helan's hand with the gold ring and bright red nail polish reached into the cage and scratched Qin Yining's face. But there was still some distance between them. Li Helan couldn't take a single hit from Qin Yining. Seeing her in such a sorry state and still talking to her in such a high and mighty manner, Li Helan gave a cold laugh. "You're so proud of your stubbornness. Let me tell you, your two little brats have already been killed by my royal brother. Their bones have been used to make wine. You're still acting in front of me. Later I'll have my royal brother kill you as well." "No, for a slut like you, it's best to throw you into the military camp. I want to see how long you can be so arrogant." Qin Yining's pupils shrank and her body swayed, almost falling down. Chapter 1150. Qin Yining's entire body trembled and she had to support herself against the wall to stand firm. Even if her body was at its limit, she still did not want to show any weakness in front of Li Helan. "I'll return the same words to you." Qin Yining looked at Li Helan with a face full of ridicule. "You came to the prison without permission. Your Majesty doesn't know, right? Coming here so rashly, will your Majesty blame you? Not mentioning anything else, the reason why I'm alive right now is because your Majesty needs me to be alive. But you insulting me like this makes me lose all will to live. Tell me, if something happens to me, will your Majesty forgive you? You're threatening me." Li Helan's expression suddenly changed. "If you want to die, then die. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Of course you're not afraid. Anyway, you're the eldest princess. Whether it is your royal brother or your husband, you don't exist. You're already married and you're still thinking about someone else's husband. If I was the emperor's son-in-law, I would have the heart to kill you. How would I be able to grow old with you? If I were your royal brother, I would have a good marriage with a trusted aide, but my own little sister would ruin it like this. You would think of a way to make a cuckold for your trusted aide, turning the marriage into a grudge. I would also want to kill you to vent my anger. You better pray that I can live until your Majesty needs me, otherwise you won't be far from death." Li Helan's entire body trembled as she heard this, but when her eyes met Qin Yining's, she couldn't help looking away. She found that she couldn't look at Qin Yining. Her eyes were too oppressive, making people inexplicably flustered. Once her aura weakened, it would be hard to recover. Li Helan also felt bored. She took a step back and wanted to say something to regain her face. "Ha! You can only be stubborn for a while. Once royal brother kills your entire family, I'll see if you can still be so proud. After saying this, she turned and left. Qin Yining stared at Li Helan's back. His body swayed, and he fell to the ground, exhausted. Princess consort, how are you? Ji Yun and Bing Tang asked anxiously. Qin Yining shook his head. I didn't. Ah. A blood-curdling scream rang out, cutting off Qin Yining's unfinished words. Everyone jumped in fright and turned to look at the source of the sound, only to see that Li Helan and the old Memar who had accompanied her just now had been pierced through by a sword and were lying limply in front of the prison door. Before they could react, several masked men in black rushed in with keys in their hands and opened everyone's prison doors. Who are you people? Qin Yining was dragged out by a man in black. It's me. At this time, he saw a short and stocky Taoist nun with a big smile on her face. She was holding a big red swaddling doll in each hand. Who else could it be other than the Tian Jizi? We don't have time to talk nonsense. Let's go. I'm afraid that someone will catch us in a moment. Qin Yining's attention was already attracted by the two swaddling dolls. How could he care about anything else? He was originally very weak, but now he was full of energy and rushed towards the Tian Jizi. Jing Zhe, Xie Yu, Ji Yun, and the others were also untied. Tian Jizi saw Qin Yining's reaction and quickly cooperated by handing her one of the swaddling dolls. You're my child. There's no mistake. She really is. Qin Yining looked at one person and then another. His heart, which had been hanging in the air for many days, finally settled back to its original place. He was so emotional that tears gushed out of his eyes. He trembled as he said, It's true. It's true. Why would I lie to you? Don't delay any longer. Let's go. Tian Jizi casually threw the swaddling dolls to Ji Yun, who had rushed to the front. He turned around and led the others to rush out. Xie Yu and Qin Yining looked at each other and said in a low voice, regardless of whether it's a trap or not, we can't stay here any longer. Qin Yining nodded. Everyone followed suit and rushed out. As soon as they got out of the prison, they saw orange lights flickering in the night sky. They heard people shouting everywhere, it's on fire. The heavenly lightning struck and the palace caught fire. Aya, how could this be? How could the palace be struck by heavenly lightning? Qin Yining immediately understood. This must be Tian Jizi's plan to divert everyone's attention to the palace's fire. In order to save the emperor, and to gain credit for saving the emperor, most of the manpower would be concentrated in the palace. The group of people ran out silently. Qin Yining ran and checked the swaddling dolls in her arms. Brother Xian was sleeping soundly. He's still not awake after all this trouble. Bing Tang, take a look at the children later. Qin Yining was very worried. Bing Tang nodded. Seeing that Qin Yining was exhausted and stumbling a few times, he hurriedly took the swaddling dolls from her arms. Jing Zhe and Da Han immediately carried Qin Yining on each side and walked out. The way out of the Ministry of Justice's prison was very smooth. There were corpses everywhere on the road. Some were stabbed to death, while others were poisoned to death by vomiting black blood. Originally, their group would have left footprints. After all, it had just snowed. However, because of the palace's fire, many people came out to see the commotion. There were also people from the Water Dragon Bureau and the 5 Cities Warden's office who anxiously went to rescue the people. The footprints on the ground were even more messy. Their group's footprints could not be seen at all. Tian Jizi's people led the way in front, while Qin Yining's group followed behind. They successfully turned a corner on a street and came to a quiet back alley. Tian Jizi said, "Hurry up and follow me. We can't leave the city now. I have a house in the city. Let's go to my house first. Why did you save me?" Qin Yining really did not dare to believe Tian Jizi. This person did things unpredictably. In the past, she even tried to kill her and wanted to tear her into pieces. She insisted that her existence was a variable that prevented the Ziwei Emperor star from reaching the top. Now, she came to save people again. Qin Yining was very suspicious of her motives. Did she have some other plan to use again? Tian Jizi glared at her fiercely. So much nonsense. Are you going or not? Seeing Qin Yining's sorry state, Jizi said again, if I wanted to kill you and your son, I wouldn't do anything. You won't be able to hold on for more than a few days anyway, right? You're still in the mood to talk nonsense at this time? Qin Yining looked at the people behind him and nodded. No matter what, they had to get through tonight first. They could think about other things at length. The group of people followed behind Jizi and took turns to avoid the soldiers they met along the way. Those soldiers were also in a hurry to put out the fire in the direction of the palace and did not care about anything else. They arrived at Jizi's house on the outskirts of the city next to the north gate without anyone noticing. This is the place. Jizi pushed open a black wooden door at the end of the alley and waved for everyone to enter. This was a large house with 3 rooms and 2 side rooms. The furnishings in the house were old-fashioned, but there were all kinds of daily necessities. It was obvious that this was an ordinary family. Jizi stood in the courtyard with her hands on her hips and panted. She looked at the 20 people behind Qin Yining and then looked at the 10 people behind her. I'm telling you, I'm not doing this for free. How much is your Wang Fei's life worth? There's also your head maidservant, your bodyguards, and my subordinates. Every time they act, they'll need to pay. This residence isn't for you to live in. You'll also need to pay. Also, with so many people eating and drinking, don't expect me to pay for it. Qin Yining was speechless for a moment. She glared at Jizi and held back a mouthful of turbid air in her chest, coughing intensely. Bing Tang hurriedly patted Qin Yining's back to calm him down. Xiaoyu said, Fairy lady, you're right. Fairy lady, you don't have to worry about the reward. My family's Wang Yi will definitely reward you handsomely in the future. Jizi chuckled, Fairy lady? But how long has it been since someone called me Fairy lady? Alright, you guys can settle down as you please. If you need anything, come to the main room and find me. You guys can stay here for the night. Tomorrow, I'll check out the situation in the city and think of a way to send you guys out. Thank you, Fairy lady. Xiaoyu bowed sincerely. Jing Zhe and the others also bowed in unison with Xiaoyu. Because it was late at night, they didn't dare to speak loudly and remained silent. Jizi pointed in Qin Yining's direction. Look, your family's Wang Yi subordinates are much more sensible and likable than you. I really don't know why he chose you. It's not like there aren't any girls who are prettier and easier to deal with than you. Qin Yining was so angry that he coughed even more violently. His vision turned black. The string that he had been clenching his teeth and persevering in the prison finally snapped. His body went limp and he fell to the ground, unconscious. Princess consort, princess consort. Everyone was in a mess. Some people were saving people, while others were boiling water. Jizi looked at these people with his hands on his hips. The smile on his face gradually faded. He snorted coldly and returned to the main room. Qin Yining had a high fever that night. When Bing Tang and Ji Yun helped her clean and change her clothes, they found that the whip wounds on her body were showing signs of suppuration. The frostbite on her hands and feet was even more serious. The 2 servant girls were so distressed that they shed tears. They cursed Li Chitian in their hearts. They even wished that there would be a fire in the palace today and burn that incapable ruler to death. Qin Yining felt like she was a fat sheep that was being roasted on a stick. Her body was so hot that it was beyond recognition. People would often flip her over and rub some unknown seasoning on her body. She really wanted to tell these people that she wasn't a sheep and that they shouldn't eat her. But no matter how much strength she had, she couldn't even lift her thin eyelids. Princess Consort's fever hasn't subsided. What should we do? Ji Yun changed a cold handkerchief for Qin Yining and used her sleeve to wipe her tears. Princess Consort has suffered so much. She hasn't eaten a full meal, hasn't had a good night's sleep, and has been put in a prisoner carriage and paraded through the streets every day. She has been humiliated by people. That incapable ruler deserves to be stabbed 1,000 times. He even stole Princess Consort's child. All right. Princess Consort will be fine. Aren't the young master and young miss also fine? Don't cry here. You're in the way. Bing Tang pushed Qin Yining aside and took out a cloth bag from her sleeve. Inside was a row of silver needles. I'll help Princess Consort reduce her fever first. Everything else can be discussed. Ji-yoon sniffled and nodded. Then I'll go take a look at the young master and young miss. Everyone was so busy that they were thrown off their feet, but they didn't dare to make any noise to attract attention. At the same time, the patrolling soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office finally discovered the abnormality in the Ministry of Justice's prison. They stepped over the disorderly corpses and saw that the ground was covered in blood. The cells that held the other felons were still intact, but the cells that held Prince Jungxuan's consort and her entourage were open. What was even more shocking was that the corpses of the Princess Royal and the female officials from the Princess Royal's residence were lying in the prison. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.